Welcome back to Bayless audiobooks, where love is dangerous, loyalty is bloody, and the wrong truth can destroy an entire life. Tonight's story begins with a woman, a baby, and a bullet meant for the wrong man. Sable Arvessa had learned that grief did not always scream. Sometimes it sat quietly in the corner of a cold apartment, breathing through a sleeping baby, watching the door like it expected death to knock twice. The radiator had gone silent again. Of course it had. It always died after midnight, when the landlord stopped answering, when the rain turned hard against the cracked window, when Sable had nothing left in her but a prayer she no longer believed in, and a body that ached from rocking a newborn through hunger, colic, and nightmares that did not belong to him yet. Niven slept against her chest, his tiny fist caught in the stretched collar of her shirt. He smelled like milk and cheap baby soap, warm and innocent in a room that had no right to hold anything innocent. Sable sat on the edge of her mattress, one bare foot pressed to the cold floorboards, one hand cupped around the back of the baby's head. On the table across from her, beneath a chipped mug and a stack of overdue notices, lay the photograph. She should have burned it. She had almost burned it 100 times. But hatred needed a face, and that face smiled from a glossy square of paper, handsome enough to make angels stupid and women foolish. Dark hair, sharp jaw, a mouth built for promises he had never meant to keep. Kael Dravik. The name still moved through Sable like broken glass. Her sister had loved that name. Leora had whispered it like a secret, cried it like a wound, carried it into the delivery room with her until her voice failed, and the machines began screaming, and Sable's whole world split open around the sound of a newborn's first breath and a mother's last. He promised he would come back, Leora had sobbed once, months before the birth, curled on the bathroom floor with both hands over her swollen belly. Sable had knelt beside her, helpless, furious, one hand in Leora's damp hair while her little sister shook so hard her teeth chattered. He said he loved me. The memory still had a smell. Wet hair, bitter hospital vitamins, the sour terror of a woman carrying a child alone. Sable closed her eyes. Niven shifted against her. "Your mama believed in the wrong man," she whispered, so softly even the rain almost swallowed it. "But I won't." The baby made a small sound and settled again. His face was peaceful in sleep, soft-cheeked and perfect, with lashes too long for a boy who had already inherited so much danger he could not understand. Everyone said babies look like nothing at first, little old men, little strangers. But Sable knew better. Niven had his father's eyes. She hated that. Then hated herself for hating anything about him. She lowered her mouth to his forehead and held it there until the heat of him entered her lips. "I'm sorry," she breathed. "I'm so sorry, baby." Outside, a car turned onto the street. Not unusual. Cars passed all night in this part of the city. Drunk men, delivery drivers, police who slowed down but never stopped, neighbors coming home from second shifts with dead eyes and wet shoes. But this engine was different. Too quiet, too smooth. Expensive things had a way of making less noise, as if even the world softened itself for them. Sable opened her eyes. Headlights slid across the wall, long and white, cutting over the peeling paint, the stacked diapers, the crib squeezed into the corner beside the mattress. The light moved across Leora's photograph and caught on Kael Dravik's smile. Her pulse changed, slow at first, then hard. Niven stirred again, feeling it through her body. "No," she whispered, though she did not know who she was speaking to. The car stopped outside her building. Sable did not move. Rain scratched at the window like fingernails. A door opened below, then another. Low male voices drifted up from the street, muffled by weather and brick. Her apartment was on the second floor. The lock on the front door was weak. The chain had rust near the screws. The hallway bulb flickered whenever someone passed beneath it. Sable eased Niven from her chest and laid him in the crib. His mouth puckered once, searching for warmth. Her heart twisted so violently she almost picked him back up. Instead, she tucked the thin blanket around him and touched his cheek with 2 trembling fingers. "Stay asleep," she whispered. "Please, just stay asleep." Then she turned toward the kitchen shelf. Behind the baby formula, behind the half-empty box of rice cereal she had bought too early because it was on sale, sat the gun. It was small, ugly, heavier than she expected every time she held it. She had bought it from a man behind the laundromat with money that should have gone to groceries. She had told herself she would never use it unless someone came for the baby. Then she had told herself other lies too, that Kael Dravik would suffer if she ever saw him, that she would recognize him instantly, that pulling the trigger would feel like justice instead of madness. 3 knocks struck the door, not loud, not hurried, controlled, patient. The sound of a man who had never needed to wonder if doors opened for him. Sable's hand closed around the gun. Her breath went thin. The knocks came again. 3. Slow. Niven let out a soft whimper from the crib. Sable froze. A voice came through the door. Sable Arvessa. Her name in that voice did not sound like a question. It sounded like a sentence. She stepped into the narrow hall of her apartment, gun hidden behind her thigh. Every board beneath her feet knew how to betray her, so she moved carefully, heel to toe, until she reached the door. The chain trembled when she touched it. "Who are you?" she asked. Silence. Then, "Open the door." Her lips pulled back from her teeth. That wasn't an answer. A pause. Not confusion. Not impatience. Assessment. Then the man said, "I am here about the child." The world narrowed. The rain disappeared. The cold disappeared. Even the baby's breathing behind her seemed to fade beneath the roar that opened inside Sable's skull. The child. Not the baby. Not Niven. The child. Like he was an object misplaced. A debt overdue. A mistake someone had finally come to collect. Her hand tightened around the gun so hard pain shot through her fingers. She thought of Leora pale in the hospital bed, lips cracked, hair pasted to her temples. She thought of the doctor saying, "We did everything we could." She thought of the nurse placing Niven in her arms while blood still stained the sheets behind the curtain. She thought of Kael Dravik's smiling mouth in the photograph, his expensive hands on her sister's waist, his promise rotting somewhere between love and abandonment. Sable slid the chain free. The door opened. He filled the doorway, black coat soaked at the shoulders, dark hair damp from the rain, a face carved in brutal, beautiful lines. Not exactly the photograph, no. Older, harder, colder. But grief did strange things to memory, and rage was not interested in details. Then she saw the ring, a heavy black and gold signet on his right hand. The Dravik mark. The same mark Leora had once traced in a picture with soft fingertips, smiling like it meant forever. Sable stopped breathing. The man's eyes moved over her face, quick and sharp, then past her into the apartment. "I'm here about—" She raised the gun. His gaze snapped back to hers. For one impossible second, he did not look afraid. He looked almost disappointed. Then, Sable fired. The sound tore the apartment apart. Niven screamed. The man jerked backward, one hand flying to his shoulder as blood burst dark across the front of his white shirt. Behind him, men shouted. Movement filled the hallway. Black suits. Weapons rage. Sable stumbled back, both hands now locked around the gun, her own ears ringing so violently she could barely hear herself breathe. The man hit the doorframe with his shoulder and sank to one knee inside her apartment, rainwater and blood dripping onto her floor. One of his men lunged forward. The wounded man lifted his head. "Stop." The word was not loud. It did not need to be. Every man in the hallway froze. Sable's arms shook. The gun wavered. She tried to keep it aimed at his chest, but her body had betrayed her. Her knees felt loose. Her stomach had turned over on itself. She had imagined this moment. Shamefully. Secretly. In the thickest parts of night, when Niven would not sleep, and Leora's absence pressed down like a hand over her mouth. She had imagined Kael Dravik bleeding. She had imagined him begging. She had imagined telling him Leora's name before she took something from him that could not be returned. But this man did not beg. He pressed his hand to the wound in his shoulder, looked at her with eyes so dark they seemed almost black, and gave another command to the men behind him. "No one touches her." Sable barked a laugh that came out broken. "How generous." His eyes flicked to the gun. "You have terrible aim." "I was aiming for your heart." Then I was right. A sob almost climbed out of her. She swallowed it down until it became anger again. "You should have stayed gone," she said. His expression changed, just slightly, enough to unsettle her. "Gone?" Niven screamed again from the crib. That sound cut through every man in the room. The wounded stranger turned his head. "No," Sable snapped. She moved before thinking, stepping between him and the crib. Gun up again. "Do not look at him." But he already had. The man's entire body went still, not careful still, not dangerous still, destroyed still. His gaze locked on the crib, on the baby twisting beneath the thin blanket, red-faced and furious, alive with lungs strong enough to accuse everyone in the room. The man stared at Niven like he had seen a ghost breathe. Sable's skin prickled. "Get out," she said. He did not move. His voice, when it came, was lower than before. "Rougher. That child—" "Don't. That child has Kael's eyes." The name struck her so hard she almost flinched. Her finger tightened on the trigger. "You don't get to say his name like you're mourning him." His gaze returned to her. For the first time she saw it. Not the photograph, not the smile, not the boyish beauty Leora had loved. This man was different. The angles were similar. Yes, the mouth, the dark hair, the Dravik arrogance written into bone. But Kael had looked like a promise. This man looked like the punishment that came after promises broke. Sable's throat went dry. "You're Kael," she said, but the words sounded weaker now. His face hardened. "No." The room seemed to tilt. One of the men in the hallway shifted, and the wounded man silenced him with nothing but a glance. Sable could hear Niven crying behind her, could hear rain dripping from the man's coat onto her floor, could hear blood hitting wood in slow, soft drops. Drip, drip, drip. The man pushed himself higher, pain flashing once across his face before he buried it. "I am Valen Dravik," he said. "Kael's brother." Sable stared at him. Her mind rejected it, then grabbed it, then rejected it again. Brother? No, that was wrong. There had been no brother in Leora's stories. No older shadow, no dawn, no man with a voice like a locked room and eyes that looked at a baby as if the dead had just reached through the grave and seized his throat. Sable shook her head. No. Valen Dravik looked past her again toward the crib. This time there was something in his face no amount of blood could hide. Grief, raw, sudden, unarmored. It terrified her more than his men, more than the guns, more than the name Dravik. Because monsters were not supposed to grieve. Not like that. Sable took one step back, blocking his view again, though her hand was shaking so badly the gun dipped. His eyes came to hers. They were no longer cold. They were furious, wounded, haunted, and locked on the one truth Sable had never prepared herself to hear. "That is my brother's son," Valen said. The words entered the room like a second bullet. Sable could not breathe. Behind her, Niven wailed harder, tiny fists beating at the air, the only innocent thing in a room full of blood and lies. Valen held one hand over his bleeding shoulder and looked at the baby as if something inside him had just been ripped open. Then his gaze cut back to Sable, not accusing yet, not forgiving, something worse, demanding. "Tell me," he said, each word controlled and lethal, "why my dead brother's child is living in this room." Chapter 2. Valen Dravik was bleeding on Sable's floor like a man who had been shot before and found the inconvenience beneath him. That was what frightened her most. Not the blood, not the black-suited men crowding her doorway with murder written into their hands, not even the fact that she had pulled the trigger on the most dangerous man who had ever stepped foot inside her apartment. It was him, the way he sat with his back against her cheap kitchen cabinet, one hand clamped over his shoulder, dark blood sliding between his fingers, and still somehow made the room feel like it belonged to him, like the bullet had only delayed him, like pain was something he allowed, not something that controlled him. "Tell me," he said again, voice low, roughened by blood loss but still lethal, "why my dead brother's child is living in this room." Sable's grip tightened around the gun. Behind her, Niven screamed in the crib, red-faced and furious, his tiny body shaking with the force of a newborn's terror. The sound went through Sable like a hook. Every instinct in her demanded she turn, lift him, soothe him. But Valen's eyes were on the baby, and Sable did not trust any Dravik eyes near what was left of her family. "Don't call him that," she said. Valen's mouth barely moved. "What?" "Your brother's child." Her voice cracked, and she hated it. "You don't get to put your name on him after what Kael did." The men in the hallway shifted at Kael's name. Valen did not. That was worse. He simply looked at her, still as a blade laid flat on a table. "What did Kael do?" Sable laughed. It came out ugly, broken. The laugh of a woman who had not slept enough to be sane and had buried too much to be gentle. "What did he do?" she repeated. "He ruined my sister. He got her pregnant. He filled her head with promises. Then he disappeared and left her to beg for scraps of silence from a man who never even had the decency to tell her goodbye." Valen's face changed. Not much, but enough. The anger in his eyes shifted, sharpened, became something colder than rage. "Careful," he said. "No." Sable stepped forward, gun still aimed at him, though her arms trembled. "No, you don't get careful from me. You came to my door asking about the child like he's property, like he's a loose end. That baby is not a Dravik mistake you get to clean up." One of Valen's men stepped inside, jaw tight. "Dawn." Valen lifted 2 fingers. The man stopped instantly. Sable saw it, even through panic. That kind of obedience did not come from loyalty alone. It came from fear, from history, from men knowing exactly what happened when Valen Dravik said stop, and they did not. Valen's gaze never left her. "What was your sister's name?" The question struck harder than she expected. Sable's mouth opened, but the name caught somewhere behind her ribs. Leora. Sweet Leora, who used to dance barefoot in the kitchen when the rent was late because she said sadness had no rhythm unless you gave it one. Leora, who believed in signs and soft endings and men who touched her like she was thing rare. Leora, who had died with a tear sliding into her hairline and Kael Dravik's name breaking open on her tongue. Sable swallowed. Sable Arvessa. Valen closed his eyes. Just once, just briefly. But she saw it. The name meant something to him. It should not have. It should have been nothing. Another girl in another tragedy orbiting his family's violence. Instead, his face went pale beneath the bronze of his skin. "Leora," he said, and the way he said it made the gun feel suddenly heavier in Sable's hands. "No." Her voice turned sharp because fear had found a crack in her hatred. "Don't say her name like you knew her." "I didn't." "Then don't say it at all." Valen opened his eyes. "My brother did." The room went silent except for Niven crying. Sable's pulse pounded so hard she felt it in her teeth. "Your brother abandoned her." "No." The word was soft, certain. It enraged her. "You don't know that. I know my guy, brother. You knew the version he showed you." Sable's throat burned. Leora knew the version men like him show women when they want something warm for the night. Valen's stare turned dangerous. Kael was many things, he said. Reckless, spoiled with charm, too quick to believe a smile could solve what blood had already ruined. His jaw flexed, but he was not cruel. Sable's laugh came again, but this time it broke apart halfway through. Then where was he? Valen's face went empty, not cold. Empty. A room after someone had taken the furniture and burned the walls. "Dead," he said. Sable stopped breathing. The word did not make sense. It entered her ears and found no place to land. Dead. No, Kael Dravik could not be dead, because Sable had kept him alive in her hatred for months. She had imagined him somewhere expensive, drinking old liquor, forgetting Leora's face. She had imagined him laughing with other women, slipping out of responsibility, protected by the kind of family that made consequences disappear. She had needed him alive. Alive meant guilty. Alive meant blame had a body. Alive meant Sable had not spent all these months burning at a ghost. "You're lying," she whispered. Valen's eyes did not soften. "I do not bleed on women's floors for sport, Sable." "You're lying." He turned his head slightly toward the hallway. "Marek." A man stepped forward, older than the others. Silver at his temples, expression carved from stone. "Yes, Don, the file." Marek hesitated for the smallest second, his gaze flicking to the gun in Sable's hands. Valen's voice lowered. "Now." The man disappeared. Sable backed toward the crib, needing to feel Niven near her. Her heel bumped the leg of it. Niven wailed harder, little face screwed up, fists jerking. "It's all right," she whispered, though nothing was. "It's all right, baby." Valen's gaze moved to the child again, yet something raw passed through him. Sable saw it and hated that she saw it, because grief had a language, and against her will, she recognized his dialect. Marek returned with a black leather folder, rain still shining on the shoulders of his coat. He handed it to Valen, who did not reach with his wounded arm. His good hand took it, fingers leaving a smear of blood across the edge. Valen opened the folder and pulled out a paper. He slid it across the floor. It stopped near Sable's bare foot. She did not move. "Read it," he said. "No." "Read it." I said no. Valen leaned his head back against the cabinet, breathing shallowly now. Blood had soaked the front of his shirt. Sweat touched his hairline. But his eyes stayed brutal. "Your bullet is still in my shoulder," he said. "My men are one wrong word away from turning this room into a funeral, and I am sitting here asking you to read a piece of paper instead of ordering them to drag you out by your hair. So read it." The gun shook. Sable bent slowly, never taking her eyes off him, and picked up the paper. Official seal. Typed lines. Name Kael Dravik. Her stomach turned. Date of death. She read it once, then again. The numbers blurred. No, she said. Her voice barely existed. Valen watched her like he hated every breath between them. When did Leora tell him she was pregnant? Sable's lips parted. She could see the day. Leora pacing the kitchen, one hand on her belly, the other clutching her phone, her eyes bright with terror and hope. I told him, Sable. I told him everything. He was quiet at first, but then he said he needed 2 days. 2 days, and he would come for me. Sable had been furious then. 2 days sounded like cowardice. 2 days sounded like a man preparing to run. 2 days before that, Sable whispered. Valen's hand tightened on the folder. He came to me that night, he said. Sable looked at him. Valen's voice had changed. It was still controlled, but something underneath it had cracked open. Not enough to spill, just enough to bleed. He came into my study like a storm. Couldn't stand still, couldn't stop smiling. He was terrified. Valen's mouth twisted, not with humor but memory. He said he was going to be a father, said the girl's name was Leora, said if I tried to use the family as an excuse to stop him from marrying her, he would leave the Draviks and take her somewhere I could never touch. Sable's vision blurred. No. He never came, she said. I know. She waited. I know. No, you don't. Her voice rose. You don't know what waiting did to her. You don't know what it looked like watching her check her phone until she hated herself. You don't know what it sounded like when she tried to convince me he still loved her, while everyone else treated her like some dirty secret that had finally been thrown away. Valen flinched. Actually flinched. It was small, but Sable saw it. I buried my brother, he said quietly. Do not tell me what I do not know about waiting for someone who will not come home. The words hit her hard enough to silence her. For a moment there was only Niven, crying. Sable turned, scooped him from the crib with one arm while still holding the gun awkwardly in the other. The second Niven hit her chest. He rooted blindly against her shirt, sobbing with his whole tiny body. Shh, she whispered, pressing her cheek to his damp hair. I have you. I have you. Valen watched them. The look on his face made something inside her twist. Not possession. Not calculation. Devastation. As if the baby in her arms had reached across months of death and put Kael's hand around his throat. What is his name? Valen asked. Sable almost refused. The refusal rose automatically. A lock sliding into place. But Niven hiccuped against her neck, and she thought of Leora whispering the name to her belly. Thought of her sister smiling through tears. Niven, she said. Niven Arvessa. Valen's eyes closed again, this time longer. When he opened them, they shone with something he would probably kill any man for noticing. Kael had that name written down. Sable's knees weakened. No. Valen reached into the folder and pulled out a smaller item, a folded sheet of paper worn at the creases. He held it out. Marek stepped toward Sable, but she flinched back. Valen's gaze cut to him. Leave it. Marek placed the paper on the floor between them and retreated. Sable stared at it. She did not want to touch it. She did anyway. With Niven pressed to her chest, she unfolded the paper one-handed. A list. Messy handwriting. Boy names. Girl names. Half of them crossed out. At the top, written in darker ink, circled twice, Niven. Beneath it, Leora likes soft names. I like strong ones. This one sounds like both. A sound came out of Sable before she could stop it. Not a sob, not a scream. Something worse. A small wounded noise that belonged to the part of her that had been keeping herself upright on hatred alone. Niven fussed against her. She pressed her lips to his head, but her mouth trembled too hard to soothe him properly. Valen's voice cut through the room, quieter now. Who told her he left? Sable shook her head. I don't know. Think. I said I don't know. Sable? The way he said her name made her look at him. Not soft. Never soft. But urgent, like the answer mattered beyond blame. She got a call, Sable said. I wasn't there when it happened. She wouldn't tell me who. She said someone connected to him, said Kael wanted her gone, that he called her a mistake, that if she tried to contact him again, your family would make sure the baby never saw daylight. The temperature of the room seemed to drop. Every man in the doorway went still. Valen did not move at all. But something about him changed so violently, Sable felt it across the room. The dawn had entered him fully. Grief stepped aside. War took its place. My family did not say that. How do I know? Because if I had known my brother left behind a pregnant woman carrying his child, Valen said, each word sharpened. There is no corner of this earth where she could have hidden from my protection. Sable wanted to reject it. She wanted to throw the paper in his face, wanted to call him a liar, wanted to keep the world simple enough to survive. But Niven's name sat in Kael's handwriting, and the death certificate lay near her foot, and Valen Dravik was bleeding on her kitchen floor with grief in his eyes and murder under his skin. Sable looked down at the baby, at Kael's eyes, at Leora's mouth. Her sister had not been abandoned. She had been deceived, broken on purpose, left to die under the weight of a lie. Sable's fingers went numb around the gun. It slipped, hit the floor with a dull, final sound. Every man in the hallway reacted. Valen lifted his bloody hand. Again they stopped. Sable barely noticed. Her whole body had begun shaking. I shot you, she whispered. Valen's gaze stayed on her face. Yes. I thought you were him. Yes. I thought voice broke. I thought if I ever saw him, I would make him answer for her. Valen dragged in a slow breath, pain tightening his mouth. My brother cannot answer. Sable squeezed her eyes shut. The words were cruel because they were true. A tear slid down her cheek and landed on Niven's blanket. Valen shifted, trying to rise. The movement tore a rough sound from him before he could bury it. Marek stepped forward again. Dawn, enough. We need to get you to the doctor. Valen ignored him. His eyes were on Sable, on Niven, on the ruin that had just rearranged all three of their lives. You should hate me, Sable said. Valen's mouth tightened. I haven't decided what you deserve yet. There it was, the threat she had expected, but it came wrapped in something stranger. Restraint. He pushed himself up with one hand braced on the cabinet. Marek moved to help, but Valen refused with a look. He rose slowly, blood dripping from his fingertips, back his face going briefly ashen before control locked back into place. Standing, he became larger, not physically, inescapably. Sable held Niven closer. Valen looked at the baby for a long moment, then at her. You and I are going to have a longer conversation. Sable swallowed. About what? About who lied to your sister, who killed my brother. His eyes lowered once to Niven's face. And who has been watching the child since the day he was born? Sable's blood turned cold. What? Valen reached into his coat with his good hand and pulled out a phone. He tapped the screen once, then turned it toward her. A grainy photograph filled the display. Sable leaving the hospital, her face hollow, hair loose and tangled. Hospital bracelet still on her wrist from where she had refused to leave Leora's body until the nurses made her. In her arms was newborn Niven, wrapped in a thin blue blanket. The angle was from across the street. Someone had been watching. Sable forgot how to breathe. Valen's voice dropped into something dark enough to raise the hair on her arms. This was sent to me tonight. By who? I do not know yet. Niven whimpered softly as if he felt the fear move through her. Valen looked toward the rain-dark window. For the first time since he arrived, Sable understood something with complete certainty. He had not come to her apartment to collect a child. He had come because someone had made sure he found one. Valen turned back to her. The blood on his shirt had spread. His face was pale, but his eyes were merciless now. Someone wanted your sister broken, he said. Someone wanted my brother dead. His gaze dropped to Niven, and now they know the baby survived. Chapter 3. By morning, Valen Dravik's blood had turned black in the cracks of Sable's floor. She had scrubbed until her fingers cramped. Bleach burned her nose. Her knees ached from kneeling too long. The rag in her hand had gone from white to pink to a dirty rust color she could not stand looking at anymore, but the stain would not lift. Some things did not leave just because a woman put her back into erasing them. Niven slept in the crib behind her. One tiny hand curled beside his cheek, his mouth moving softly like he was dreaming of milk. The apartment had that fragile morning silence she had learned to fear. Not peace. Never peace. Just the thin pause before something else went wrong. Sable sat back on her heels and stared at the floor. She had shot a Don, not Kael. Not the man she had built into a monster inside her head. Valen, Kael's brother. The man who had stood bleeding in her kitchen while truth fell around her in pieces too sharp to hold. Kael was dead. Kael had been dead before Leora's hope finished breaking. Kael had chosen the name Niven. Sable pressed the heel of her hand to her mouth hard enough to hurt. No, She could not start crying again. Crying did nothing but steal breath from a woman who needed both hands free. She pushed herself up, rinsed the rag in the sink, and watched the water run red-brown down the drain. A knock hit the door. Her body went cold. Not the landlord's knock. Not the neighbor's soft tap when she needed sugar or complained about Niven crying. This knock had weight, confidence. A memory. Sable turned slowly. Niven stirred. "No," she whispered, not to the door this time, but to the universe. "Not now." The knock came again. She crossed the apartment and reached behind the formula cans out of habit before remembering the gun was no longer there. Valen's men had taken it last night after she dropped it. Not roughly. Not with threats. One of them had simply picked it up with 2 fingers and removed it from the room, as if Sable herself had become a weapon they were not sure how to classify. She grabbed a kitchen knife instead, a pathetic one. The handle was loose, the blade had a nick near the tip. Still, her fingers closed around it. Through the door, a familiar voice said, "Open, Sable." Her throat tightened. Valen, alive. Men like him did not die from one bullet. They became angrier. "I still have knives," she called, a pause. Then, dry as winter, "and I still have questions." She hated that her mouth almost twitched. Almost. Sable unlocked the door but kept the chain on. She opened it 2 inches. Valen Dravik stood in the hallway in a black suit beneath a black overcoat, his skin a shade too pale, his left shoulder bandaged beneath his shirt. He looked freshly stitched, freshly furious, and far too elegant for a building that smelled like damp plaster and old cooking oil. 2 men stood behind him, not the same ones from last night. Or maybe they were. All Valen's men had the same silence, the same hands, the same eyes that looked at doors, corners, windows, escape routes. Valen looked at the chain, then at her knife. "You plan to carve me this time? You plan to break in?" "If I planned to break in, we would not be discussing it." "Funny," she said. "People must love you at parties." "I do not attend parties. No one invites you? No one survives disappointing me." She stared at him through the crack in the door. He did not smile. That made it worse. "What do you want?" she asked. His gaze shifted past her shoulder toward the crib. Sable's hand tightened on the door. His eyes came back to hers. "To see the child?" "No." "Sable?" "No." Her voice hardened. "You do not walk in here the morning after I find out my sister died believing a lie and start making demands." Something moved behind his eyes at the mention of Leora, but he buried it fast. "I am not here to take him." That is exactly what a man says before taking something. Valen looked tired then. Not weak, but tired in a way that sat beneath the skin, old and hidden. "If I wanted to take Niven," he said quietly, "you would already be screaming." Her stomach twisted. The words were cruel. Worse, they were honest. She hated him for the truth of them. She shut the door, slid the chain free, then opened it wide enough to let him in. The hallway men stayed outside. Valen stepped over the threshold and paused. His gaze moved through the apartment, and Sable felt every inch of her life become evidence. The mattress on the floor. The laundry basket with baby clothes folded on top because there was no dresser. The cracked window sealed with tape. The pot under the sink catching a slow leak. The stack of unpaid bills beneath Leora's photograph. The formula can she had watered down 2 days ago and hated herself for doing, even though she had told herself it was only once. Only enough to stretch until payday. Only because Niven needed to eat and guilt was not currency. Valen saw all of it. His face did not change. That somehow made it worse. "Don't look at my life like that," she said. His gaze returned to her. "Like what?" "Like it is evidence." "It is." Heat rushed into her cheeks. She lifted the knife a little. "Careful." His eyes dipped to the blade. "You have terrible taste in weapons. You keep standing in my apartment bleeding, and I'll upgrade. I am not bleeding. There's blood on your collar." His jaw tightened. So there was. Good. She wanted him human. She wanted proof the bullet had not vanished into the myth of him. Behind them, Niven made a small sound. Both of them turned. Sable reached him first. She set the knife down on the crate beside the crib and lifted the baby, gathering his warm little body against her chest. He grunted, fussed, then rooted against her shirt. Valen stood near the door, watching like he had walked into a church where he had no right to kneel. Sable hated that image. She hated more that it fit. "Don't stare at him," she said. "I am trying not to. Try harder." His mouth tightened. "Niven," he said, and the name came out carefully, almost unfamiliar on his tongue. Sable held the baby closer. His name is not yours to practice. No. Valen's gaze lifted to her. But it was my brother's to choose. The sentence landed between them with the weight of Kael's handwriting. Sable looked away first. The apartment felt too small for all the dead standing inside it. Valen moved then, not toward her, but toward the window. He touched the tape, sealing the crack with 2 fingers, then glanced at the radiator. It stopped working again, Sable said, too sharply, as if he had accused her. When? Does it matter? Yes. She hated that answer, too. Last night, it does this. In winter? It isn't winter. It is cold enough for him. Valen looked at Niven. And you? Sable's pride rose like a guard dog. We're fine. No, you are surviving. There is a difference. She stepped toward him, Niven pressed to her chest. Do not come in here and judge me. His head turned slowly. I am not judging you. Your face is. My face is angry. At me? At a world where my brother's son slept beside a broken heater while I sat in a house with 12 empty rooms. The words hit something tender and bruised inside her. For 1 second, she had no answer. Valen pulled out his phone. Sable stiffened. What are you doing? Fixing what should already have been fixed. I did not ask for help. No, you shot me. Her eyes narrowed. He continued as if she had not reacted. And now I know you are too stubborn to ask for anything, even if the child needs it. I got him this far. Valen looked at her then, really looked. Yes, he said, you did. The softness of it unsettled her more than every threat he had made. Sable looked down at Niven because the baby was easier to face. His tiny fingers had curled around the loose fabric of her shirt. His lashes fluttered. His whole life fit between her hands. And somehow men with guns and rings and bloodlines thought they had the right to decide where he belonged. Valen spoke into the phone. Heat, window, food, formula, diapers, today. A pause. No, not later. Now. Another pause. His voice cooled. If the landlord objects, buy the building and make him object from the street. Sable's head snapped up. Absolutely not. Valen ended the call. Too late. You cannot buy my building. I can. That wasn't permission. It was a correction. God, you are impossible. I have been called worse. By women, mostly by men in their last 10 seconds. She stared at him. Again, no smile. Maybe he was serious. Probably he was serious. She should have been terrified. Instead, something exhausted in her almost laughed. Not because he was funny, because the last 24 hours had become so absurd that her body no longer knew which emotion to choose. Niven let out a sharper cry. Sable adjusted him, bouncing gently. Shh, baby. I know. Valen watched, his expression changing in a way she could not name. What? She snapped. He is smaller than I expected. He's a baby. I know what babies are. You're staring at him like you found him under a rock. Valen's jaw flexed. I have held guns with less caution than I would hold him. The sentence caught her off guard. She looked at him, then down at Niven, then back. You're afraid of a newborn? I am aware of my limitations. That might be the first humble thing you've said. It will not become a habit. This time she did laugh, barely, a breath more than a sound. But it happened. Valen noticed. His gaze sharpened, not with triumph, but with something quieter. Something almost human. Then Niven fussed again, and Sable shifted him higher on her shoulder. Valen looked at the baby's small hand gripping her shirt. You think I came to take him, he said. I know men like you take what they want. No, he said. Men like me take what belongs to us. Her whole body went rigid. His eyes cut to hers. And Niven is Dravik blood, he said before she could speak. That is true whether you like it or not. Do not. But you, he continued, voice lower, are the only mother he knows. Sable froze. The room seemed to exhale. She had expected to argue, to threaten, to dress ownership up as protection. She had expected cold legal words, bloodline words, family words. Not that. Not an acknowledgement of the thing she had become by force, by love, by one last promise whispered over Leora's cooling hand. The only mother he knows. Her vision blurred without warning. She blinked hard. Valen saw it and looked away first. A mercy. She hated that too. You do not get to be decent after scaring me half to death, she muttered. I did not scare you half to death. I believe you shot me before reaching that point. Do you plan to mention that every time we talk? Yes. Good to know. A knock came at the open doorframe. One of Valen's men appeared, carrying bags. Then another. Formula. Diapers, blankets, groceries, a heater still in its box. Sable stared as they filled her kitchen with she had been calculating in pennies for weeks. Her throat tightened until swallowing hurt. "I don't want your charity," she said. Valen's gaze stayed on the men unloading supplies. "It is not charity." "What is it then?" "Debt. I don't owe you anything." "No," he said. "I owe Kael." The simple brutality of that made her quiet. When the men finished, Valen spoke to them in low tones near the door. Sable caught fragments, 2 on the front entrance, 1 at the alley. "Watch the roof access. No one speaks to her unless she speaks first. No one enters without permission." Then Valen turned back. "I am leaving guards." "No." "Yes. You don't get to assign men to my life. I do when someone sent me a photograph of you leaving the hospital with Niven." Fear slid through her, cold and immediate. She looked toward the window. Every shadow outside seemed suddenly occupied. Valen's voice softened by 1 degree. "Sable." She hated hearing her name like that, like he knew fear had found her. "I did not ask for guards," she said, weaker now. "No." He moved toward the door, then paused. "You asked for war when you pulled the trigger." Her eyes lifted to his. He stood in the doorway, too pale beneath his control, 1 hand tucked carefully inside his coat to hide whatever pain still lived in his shoulder. "And what did you ask for?" she said. His expression went dark. "The truth." Then he left. The apartment felt too full after he was gone, too warm with the portable heater humming, too stocked with food she had not bought, too guarded by men she did not trust and needed anyway. Sable fed Niven, changed him, sat on the mattress while he slept across her lap, 1 tiny fist tucked beneath his chin. Hours passed. Rain slowed to a mist. The building settled around her with old pipes and distant arguments through thin walls. By night, exhaustion dragged at her bones again. She had just laid Niven in the crib when someone knocked downstairs, not on her door. The front entrance. A muffled voice. One of Valen's guards. Then silence. Sable waited. Nothing. Then something scraped softly against her apartment door. Her heart stopped. She moved toward it slowly. No gun now, only the loose-handled knife. She opened the door, a crack. At first she saw nothing. Then her eyes lowered. A dead crow lay on her welcome mat. Wings spread wide, black feathers wet and glossy beneath the hallway light. Sable's stomach lurched. A strip of paper had been pinned beneath one wing with a thin silver blade. Her hand shook as she crouched. The hallway smelled like rain, rot, and something metallic. She pulled the note free. The words were written in blocky black ink. The baby should have died with his father. Behind her, Niven began to cry. Sable backed into the apartment, note crushed in her fist, every drop of warmth Valen had brought vanishing beneath a fear so deep it felt ancient. For the first time since Leora died, Sable understood the truth. Kael's death had not ended the danger. It had only left Niven next in line. Chapter 4. Valen Dravik did not knock the second time he came for her. He entered like a storm with a key no one had given him, black coat snapping at his knees, eyes cutting once to the dead crow on the hallway floor before landing on the note crushed in Sable's fist. His face changed. Not with surprise, with confirmation, as if some ugly part of him had been waiting for the world to prove it was still cruel. Sable stood in the middle of the apartment with Niven screaming against her shoulder, the silver blade from the note lying on the table, and the dead bird's wet feathers staining the welcome mat outside her door. Valen looked at the bird, then at the baby, then at her. "Pack the child," he said. "Now." Sable's fear turned instantly into anger, because anger was easier to hold without shaking. "You don't get to break into my apartment and give orders." His gaze flicked to the open door. "Your lock gave up faster than you did. That is not funny. It was not meant to be." Behind him, his men spread through the hall with silent efficiency, one covering the stairs, another checking the window at the far end, another speaking low into a radio. Sable tightened her hold on Niven. The baby's cries had gone hoarse, tiny fists kneading at the collar of her shirt. His warmth was the only thing keeping her rooted to the floor. "This is my home," she said. Valen looked around the cramped apartment, the supplies he had sent stacked beside the kitchen, the portable heater humming near the crib, the bloodstain still shadowed in the floorboards. "No," he said. "This is where you have been cornered." Her throat tightened. "I am not leaving with you." His eyes sharpened. "Someone got past my men, left a death threat at your door, and walked away clean." That means they know this building. They know the exits. They know where the child sleeps. Stop calling him the child. Niven, he corrected at once, and somehow that made it worse. They know where Niven sleeps. Sable pressed her cheek to the baby's head. The note seemed to burn inside her fist. The baby should have died with his father. She had read it 5 times, as if the words might change if she hated them hard enough. They had not. Valen stepped closer. Sable stepped back. His jaw tightened, but he stopped. That small restraint hit her in a place she did not want him touching. I am not taking him from you, he said. You keep saying that. Because you keep looking at me like I am reaching for him. Aren't you? No. His voice lowered. I am reaching for the threat before it reaches him. Niven coughed through a cry. It was tiny, soft, nothing but a baby's strained little sound. But it ended the fight in Sable before pride could keep swinging. She looked down at him. His face was flushed, his lashes clumped with tears, his mouth trembled like the whole world had already been too loud for him. Leora had trusted her with him, not with revenge, not with hatred, with him. Sable closed her eyes. Where? The Dravik estate. Her eyes snapped open. No. Yes. That is not safer. That is your world. My world has walls, guards, doctors, secure rooms, and men who know how to die before a baby does. She flinched. Valen saw it. His expression did not soften, but something in his voice did. I will not apologize for the truth if the truth keeps him breathing. She hated him for that. For being right when she needed him to be a monster. For standing there with his shoulder bandaged beneath his suit, probably in pain because of her, still choosing the baby first. Sable turned away sharply before her face betrayed too much. What do I pack? Whatever matters. The answer was so simple it nearly broke her. Because the terrible truth was, not much did. A few baby clothes, Leora's box, the photograph of Leora and Kael, the cracked phone she had not been brave enough to search again. Niven's blanket. The hospital bracelet tied around the corner of his crib. Her entire life fit into one duffel bag and the hollow beneath her ribs. Valen did not help. He stood by the door and let her choose. That somehow felt like another mercy he had no right giving. When Sable reached for Leora's photograph, her fingers froze on Kael's face. Valen saw. Take it, he said. She shoved it into the bag without looking at him. I wasn't asking. No, he said. You rarely do. She almost turned on him for that, but Niven whimpered and curled deeper into her chest, and the fight drained out of her again. 15 minutes later, she stepped into the hallway with Niven wrapped tight against the rain, the duffel on her shoulder, and the dead crow still lying like a curse beside the door. Valen looked at one of his men. Burn it. Sable's stomach turned. The bird? The message. She understood then. He was not disgusted by the dead thing. He was offended someone had dared leave fear at her door. Outside, the black car waited at the curb, engine running. Sable paused at the building entrance. The street looked the same as always. Wet pavement, flickering corner light, trash bags near the alley. A woman across the street smoking beneath a broken awning. But now every window felt like an eye. Every shadow felt occupied. Valen opened the car door. Sable stared at him. What? You are waiting for me to put him in first. That is usually how cars work. No, you are making sure I don't think you're taking him. Valen's gaze held hers. Yes. The honesty slid under her defenses before she could stop it. She climbed inside with Niven in her arms. The car smelled like leather, rain, and Valen's cologne. Something dark and expensive threaded with the faint iron scent of blood beneath his clean shirt. He sat across from her instead of beside her, giving space that felt deliberate. Outside, the building pulled away. Sable watched it through tinted glass until it disappeared behind rain and traffic. She did not cry. She had no room in her body for crying. The Dravik estate rose beyond iron, gates nearly an hour later, high on a private road where the city became quieter and wealth stopped shouting because everyone nearby already knew who owned it. The gates opened before the car stopped. Men with rifles stood beneath stone arches. Cameras tracked the car's approach. The house itself waited at the end of the drive, all dark windows and pale stone, too beautiful to be welcoming. Sable looked at it and felt her chest close. This is not a house, she said. Valen glanced toward the estate. No. What is it? A warning, she believed him. Inside, the floors shone like black glass. Chandeliers hung overhead like frozen rain. Staff moved silently, appearing and disappearing through doors. Sable barely noticed before they closed. She felt damp, poor, exhausted, and furious. Niven slept now, cheek pressed to her collarbone, unaware that the world around him had changed from cracked plaster to marble. Valen led her up a wide staircase to a suite near the east wing. Near the nursery, he explained, as if that was supposed to comfort her. The nursery nearly undid her. Ivory crib, soft rugs, warm lamps, shelves lined with formula, diapers, folded clothes, tiny socks, blankets thick enough to make guilt rise up the back of her throat. Sable stood in the doorway, unable to move. Valen stopped behind her. She hated that she could feel him there without turning. This was prepared too quickly, she said. Yes, that means you ordered it before I agreed to come. Yes, she turned. You arrogant. I was not going to let pride keep a newborn in a marked apartment. My pride kept him alive before you knew he existed. The words came out sharp enough to cut. Valen's face went still. Then he nodded once. You are right. Sable had been ready for cruelty, for command, for that cold dawn arrogance. She was not ready for agreement. It stole her anger's balance. He stepped aside, letting her enter first. Sable laid Niven in the crib with hands that trembled despite her best efforts. The mattress was firm, the blanket soft, the room warm enough that he did not curl inward from cold. Relief moved through her so suddenly she had to grip the crib rail. She hated it. Hated that wealth could solve in 1 hour what love had been fighting for months. Valen saw her knuckles whiten. You do not have to thank me. I wasn't going to. I know. She looked at him then, and for one brief second the room held something almost like understanding. Then a woman's voice cut from the hallway. So this is Kael's little scandal. Sable turned. An elegant woman stood at the nursery door, silver hair swept into a flawless knot, diamonds at her ears, mouth shaped like judgment. She looked at Niven the way someone might look at spilled wine on silk. Valen's expression closed. Aunt Mireva. The woman entered without invitation. Her eyes passed over Sable, taking in her cheap clothes, wet hair, tired face, dismissing all of it. All this chaos over a child no one can prove belongs to us. Sable stepped in front of the crib. Valen's voice was quiet. Choose your next words carefully. Mireva smiled faintly. I am thinking of the family. An unclaimed child creates complications, especially one brought in by a woman who shot the Don. Sable felt heat rise behind her eyes. She had been scared all night, humiliated all morning, dragged from the only home Niven knew into a palace full of people who looked at him like a problem. Something inside her snapped clean. He is not a complication, Sable said. Mireva's brows lifted. Sable took one step forward. He is a baby. He is 8 pounds of breath and hunger and his mother's last miracle. So if you need a word for him, use his name. The hallway went silent. Mireva's gaze sharpened. You speak boldly for someone standing under our roof. I have stood under worse. Valen moved then, not in front of Sable, beside her. His hand settled at her waist, not possessive, not gentle exactly, but firm enough to stop her from walking straight into a war she did not understand. The touch burned through the thin fabric of her shirt. Sable went still. Valen looked at his aunt. Niven is Kael's blood, he said. He is under my protection. Anyone who calls him a complication again will discover how little patience I have left. Mireva's face tightened. For 1 second, Sable thought she would argue. Then the older woman lowered her chin by the smallest degree. Of course, Don. She left with her diamonds glittering and her disapproval still poisoning the air. Sable exhaled shakily. Valen's hand left her waist. She hated that she noticed the absence. Your family is charming, she said. They are worse at dinner. That was meant to be comforting? No. Despite everything, Sable almost smiled again. Almost. Hours later, after Niven had fed and settled, after a doctor checked him and confirmed he was healthy, after Sable refused the dinner tray 3 times and then ate half of it because hunger was stronger than pride, she wandered from the suite with Leora's photograph in her hand. She did not mean to find Valen, but light spilled from a study at the end of the hall, and inside he stood alone before the fireplace holding an old photograph. Not the one Sable had. This one showed Kael younger, maybe 16. Laughing with his head tipped back, one arm slung around Valen, who looked barely older but already serious. Sable stopped in the doorway. Valen did not turn. He was always laughing, he said. She swallowed. He looks younger there. He was always younger to me. The words were quiet, human. They reached her before she could brace against them. Sable looked at the photo in her own hand, at Leora smiling beside Kael like the world had not yet betrayed her. She waited for him, Sable said. Until the end. Valen's shoulders shifted once, as if something had struck him from behind. So did I. The room went painfully still. For one moment they were not shooter and victim, not Don and outsider, not two people circling a baby the dead had left between them. They were just the ones who had waited and lost. Valen's phone vibrated on the desk. The sound cut through the quiet like a blade. He set the photo down and picked it up. Sable watched his face change. Grief vanished. The dawn returned. "What is it?" she asked. Valen looked at the screen for another long second before turning it toward her. A message glowed there from an unknown number. Ask the girl what Leora heard the night before she died. Sable's blood went cold. The photograph slipped from her fingers and hit the floor face down. Valen's eyes lifted to hers. "What did your sister hear, Sable?" Her mouth opened, but no answer came. Because the night before Leora died, there had been a message. A voice. A final sob behind a locked bathroom door. And Sable, exhausted and angry and terrified, had never forced her sister to tell her everything. Chapter 5. Sable had carried her sister's box through poverty, grief, hunger, and blood, but she had never opened it. Not once. Not when Neven cried through entire nights, and she wanted Leora's voice so badly she pressed her fist against her mouth to keep from screaming. Not when the funeral home called about the final balance. Not when she found one of Leora's hair ties beneath the bathroom sink and sat on the tile floor for an hour. Because something that small should not have survived when her sister had not. The box sat now on the rug in Valen Dravik's study, between a grieving woman and a wounded Don, looking too ordinary to hold the last pieces of a dead girl. Cardboard. Taped corners. Leora's name written across the top in Sable's handwriting because the hospital had given her a plastic bag and a clipboard and told her to collect belongings as if grief could be organized. Valen stood near the fireplace, one arm held stiffly at his side beneath his black jacket. His shoulder had started bleeding again earlier. Sable had seen the dark stains spreading through his shirt before he adjusted his coat to hide it. He was pretending not to be in pain. She was pretending not to notice. That seemed to be their language. "Open it," he said. Sable's eyes snapped up. "Do not order me through my sister's things." His jaw tightened. That message was not sent for poetry. I know what it was sent for. Then we need to know what she heard. "We?" Sable laughed once, brittle and sharp. "There was no we when Leora was alive. There was no we when she was crying on my bathroom floor. There was no we when she was dying and I was begging a doctor to save her." Valen took the hit without moving. The fire cracked behind him, throwing gold across the hard lines of his face. "No," he said quietly. "There was not." She hated the answer because it did not fight her. She could fight cruelty. She could fight arrogance. She could fight a man who came into her life demanding blood and obedience. But Valen kept giving her truth, and truth had no throat to grab. Sable looked down at the box. Her hands had begun to shake. "I don't know if I can." Valen's voice shifted, not soft exactly. He did not know how to be soft, but lower, steadier. "You do not have to do it alone." Something inside her recoiled. The words were too close to kindness, too close to the thing she had wanted for months and been denied until wanting became humiliating. "I've done everything alone." "I know." "No, you don't." His eyes hardened with old grief. "I buried my brother in a closed casket because they did not leave me enough of him to say goodbye properly. Do not mistake my silence for ignorance." Sable went still. The room changed. Not enough to forgive, not enough to trust, enough to remember that grief had eaten at both sides of this nightmare. She sank to her knees in front of the box. The tape peeled back with a sound so small it made her stomach twist. Inside was Leora. Not really. Never really. But pieces. A pale blue sweater that still held the faintest ghost of her perfume, a hospital bracelet, a cheap silver necklace with a tiny moon charm, a folded stack of letters tied with a ribbon, a cracked phone wrapped in a scarf, a baby blanket Leora never got to use. Sable touched the sweater first. The moment her fingers brushed the fabric, she was back in the old apartment, watching Leora stand at the window with both hands on her belly, pretending she was not waiting for headlights. Sable closed her eyes. God, she whispered. Valen did not speak. Good. If he had said the wrong thing, she might have broken something. She reached for the letters. The first one had Kael's name written across the front. Not mailed, never sealed. Sable unfolded it with care because Leora's handwriting already looked wounded. That slanted and shaky, as if she had been crying when she wrote. Kael, I keep telling myself there has to be a reason. I know what they said. You called me. I know what they told me you wanted. But I keep hearing your voice from that last night, and you did not sound like a man leaving. You sounded afraid. You sounded happy. You sounded like you were coming back. Sable's breath caught. She could not read the next line aloud. Valen stepped closer. Not too close. Close enough that she knew he was there. Sable forced herself to continue. If they are lying to me, please find me. If you are dead, then I am sorry I believed them for even 1 second. The paper blurred. Sable pressed it to her chest and bent over it, pain opening so suddenly she nearly made a sound. Leora had doubted the lie, even hurt, even frightened, even abandoned in every way that mattered. Some part of her had still reached toward the truth, and Sable had not known. She had been so busy hating Kael that she had not heard the crack in Leora's belief. Valen's voice came from above her. She knew something was wrong. Sable looked up at him through wet eyes. Not enough to save her. The words landed hard. Valen's face closed, but his hand curled at his side. Give me the phone. Sable shook her head instantly. No, there may be more. I said no. Sable. She is not evidence. The words burst out of her. She is not a file. She is not some dead witness in your war. She was my sister. Valen's expression sharpened, and for a second she saw the dawn flare through him. Then he looked down at the sweater in her lap, the letters, the bracelet. When he spoke again, the edge had dulled. And Kael was my brother. Silence. The fire snapped. Sable turned the cracked phone over in her hands. The screen was spiderwebbed. One corner was chipped. The case had a dried smear on it she suspected was foundation or blood or both. Leora had held that phone like a lifeline in the last months of her life. Waiting. Always waiting. Sable pressed the power button. Nothing. Valen moved to his desk, opened a drawer, and pulled out a slim charging cable. Men like him always had what they needed. He crouched beside her, careful with his wounded shoulder, and plugged it in. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the screen flickered. A dead thing gasping awake. Sable's throat closed. The phone asked for a passcode. Sable entered Leora's birthday. Wrong. She entered Nevin's birth month and day. Wrong. Her fingers hovered. Then she typed Kael's birthday, the one Leora had once memorized, and whispered like it was sacred. The phone unlocked. Sable made a broken sound. Valen's face turned away, but not fast enough. She saw what that did to him. Messages loaded slowly, so many missed calls, so many unsent drafts, so much pain trapped behind a cracked screen. Then the voicemail icon appeared with one saved file. No name, just a date. The night before Leora died. Sable stared at it. Her finger would not move. I heard her crying that night, she said. Her voice sounded far away. She locked herself in the bathroom. I was angry because she wouldn't open the door. I was tired. Niven was heavy inside her, and she was hurting, and I thought... Her throat tightened. I thought she was crying over him again. I thought I couldn't listen to it anymore. Valen said nothing. Sable looked down at the phone. I went to bed. The confession left her mouth like a sin. I left her alone with whatever broke her. Valen crouched fully now, across from her, his wounded shoulder stiff, his face drawn from pain and something deeper. You were her sister, he said, not her jailer. You could not force every truth out of her. Sable shook her head. I should have tried. Yes, he said. Her eyes flew to his. The honesty was brutal. Then he continued, and so should I have found Kael's killer before your sister ever had to hear a lie. That silenced her. Because he had taken a portion of the blame and laid it beside hers, not to comfort, but to make the weight less lonely. Sable pressed play. Leora's voice filled the study, at first only breathing, ragged, thin, terrified. Then a whisper. Sable, if I don't make it, please don't let my baby think I didn't want him. Sable clapped one hand over her mouth. Valen's gaze dropped to the floor. Leora sobbed softly through the speaker. I wanted him. I wanted him so much, even if Kael didn't. Even if all of it was a lie, the baby wasn't. He was never the mistake. Sable folded over the phone. No, she whispered. No, Leora? The recording crackled. There was movement, a door closing somewhere, Leora breathing faster. No, then another voice, not close to the phone, muffled, low, male. Sable froze. Valen's head lifted sharply. The voice came again, buried beneath static. "Tell her he said it himself." Leora cried harder. No, he wouldn't." The male voice turned colder. "Kael Dravik called you a pretty mistake. That is all you were ever going to be." Sable's blood went ice white. Valen's entire body went still, the kind of stillness that came before violence. Leora's voice shook. "He loved me." The man laughed softly. "Men like him love for an evening. Then their families clean up the stain." Sable's grip tightened around the phone until her fingers ached. Valen reached out, not touching her, but holding his hand near the phone. "Play that part again." She did. The voice crawled through the study a second time. "Men like him love for an evening." Valen's face changed. The name left him like a curse. "Soren Vaskari." Sable looked up slowly. The world narrowed to the fire, put the phone, and Valen's eyes. "Who is that?" "A rival." His voice had gone flat, deadly. "A man who hated Kael because Kael humiliated him in front of half the Eastern families. A man who wanted my brother punished and my house weakened." Sable's stomach turned. "He killed Kael?" Valen did not answer fast enough. That was answer enough. "We suspected him," he said. "Never proved it." "And Leora?" His eyes found the phone. "Soren did not just kill Kael," he said. "He made sure the woman carrying his child believed Kael died a coward, while still breathing somewhere without her." Sable could not understand cruelty that deep. Her mind tried to find the shape of it and failed. To murder a man was one thing. To break the woman he loved afterward, to feed her lies while his child grew inside her, to let her body carry grief so heavy it followed her into childbirth. A sound tore from Sable's chest. She dropped the phone as if it burned and stumbled to her feet. The room lurched. Valen rose too quickly. His face flashed with pain, but he caught her before her knees gave. His hand closed at her waist. His good arm steadied her, warm, firm, real. Sable should have pushed him away. She did not. Her forehead hit his chest, not by choice, not exactly, but because her body had run out of places to fall. The scent of him surrounded her. Smoke from the fireplace, clean linen, blood beneath bandages, something dark and expensive that belonged to him alone. Which she hated that he was the one holding her upright. She hated that she needed it. "I should have known," she whispered into his shirt. Valen's voice came above her, low and rough. "You were lied to by men who bury countries." She died thinking he hated her. His arm tightened by a fraction. "He died trying to get back to her." The sentence broke her. Sable gripped the front of his jacket and cried the way she had not allowed herself to cry at the hospital, or the funeral, or in the apartment with Niven hungry and bills stacked like accusations. She cried for Leora waiting by the window, for Kael dying with baby names in his pocket, for Niven born into a war before he had learned how to focus his eyes, for herself because she had built a home out of hatred and now the walls were gone. Valen held her through it. Awkwardly at first, like comfort was another weapon he had been trained to handle only by necessity, then steadier. His palms spread against the center of her back, careful, grounding. He did not hush her, did not tell her to breathe, did not insult her. Grief with softness it had not earned. He simply stood there and took the weight when she could not. After a while, Sable realized his breathing had changed, too shallow. She pulled back fast. His face was pale. The blood on his collar had spread. "Your shoulder," she said, wiping her face with the heel of her hand. "It is fine. You are bleeding through your shirt. I have done worse." "That is not the flex you think it is." For the first time, something almost like a ghost of a smile touched his mouth. It vanished before it became real. Sable stepped away, embarrassed by how cold she felt, without his hand on her back. She picked up the phone from the rug. Leora's voicemail had ended. The room seemed emptier without her voice. Valen looked toward the nursery wing beyond the study doors, where Niven slept under guard, unaware that his parents' tragedy had just grown teeth. "Soren wanted pain to travel," Valen said. "From Kael to Leora, from Leora to you, from you to the child." Sable's hand tightened around the phone. "And now?" Valen's eyes came back to hers. There was no warmth in them now. Only promise. "Now it travels back." A chill moved through her, Not fear exactly, recognition. This was the man people whispered about, not the wounded stranger on her floor, not the grieving brother with an old photograph, not the careful hand at her waist. The dawn. The room seemed to darken around him. Sable should have been horrified. Part of her was. Another part, the part that had held Niven while reading a death threat meant for a baby, wanted to hand him the match and watch the world that hurt Leora burn. Valen reached for his phone and typed one-handed. "What are you doing?" she asked. "Finding everything Soren has touched since the night Kael died. And then," his gaze lifted, "and then I take away his ability to touch anything again." Sable swallowed. Leora's phone felt heavy in her palm. From the nursery, faint and soft, Niven began to fuss. The sound passed through the study like a reminder. Not revenge, not war. A baby, a living child at the center of the dead. Sable turned toward the door, but Valen spoke before she left. "Sable." She looked back. His face was half in firelight, half in shadow. "Soren did not leave your sister alive by accident," he said. "He left her alive so her pain would become a weapon." Sable's stomach twisted. Valen's voice dropped colder. "And if he knows about Niven, he is not finished using it." Chapter 6. The first time Sable heard someone call Niven a gutter heir, she was holding him close enough to feel his heartbeat against her wrist. It was just after dawn, that strange hour when the Dravik estate looked almost holy from the outside. Pale light poured through the tall windows. The marble floors shone like still water. Somewhere downstairs, men who carried weapons beneath tailored jackets spoke in low voices as if violence had rules if you dressed it well enough. Sable had not slept. Niven had fussed through half the night, unsettled by the new room, the new smells, the strange quiet of wealth. The apartment had been noisy, pipes banging, neighbors shouting, traffic dragging itself through rain. Here silence had teeth. Every time Niven stirred, Sable woke with her hand already reaching. Every time the hallway creaked, she thought of the dead crow. Every time she closed her eyes, she heard Leora's voice on that recording. He was never the mistake. Sable pressed her lips to Niven's soft hair and kept walking. The guard outside her suite had told her Valen was in council. He said it politely, but his body blocked the hallway in a way that made clear she had not been expected to go there. Sable went anyway. She had been told where the nursery was, where the kitchen was, where her suite was, as if the rest of the estate had been built for other people's decisions. But her life had been rearranged by decisions made in rooms she had never entered. No more. She followed the sound of voices down the east corridor, past oil portraits of dead Draviks, who all seemed to share the same severe mouth, and stopped outside a pair of dark wooden doors left slightly open. Inside, men argued like knives sliding from sheaths. Recognition invites challenge, concealment invites assassination. The boy's existence weakens Valen's position. The boy is Kael's blood. If he is Kael's blood. Sable went still. Niven slept against her, his tiny fist curled in the fabric of her shirt. Another voice spoke then, smoother than the rest, younger, meaner. Even if the child is Kael's, what exactly are we defending? A gutter heir dragged in by a woman who put a bullet in our dawn. The words entered Sable's body like flame. For 1 second she could not move, not because she was afraid, because rage, real rage, the kind that lived behind the ribs and blackened everything it touched, required a moment to become useful. Niven made a soft sound in his sleep. That did it. Sable pushed the council doors open with her shoulder. The room fell silent. Every face turned. There were 12 people seated around the long black table. Men in suits. 2 women in diamonds. Valen at the head, pale beneath his control, one arm held stiffly beneath his jacket, his bandaged shoulder still healing, because she had put a bullet there. His eyes found her immediately. Not surprised, annoyed maybe, concerned, definitely. But he did not tell her to leave. That alone gave her enough room to breathe. Sable stepped inside with Niven in her arms. "Say it again," she said. No one spoke. She looked down the table, following the sting of the insult until her eyes landed on a man with sharp cheekbones, pale brown hair, and a mouth that looked accustomed to being cruel for sport. He leaned back in his chair, one hand resting near a crystal glass. Valen Dravik. She remembered him from dinner the night before. He had watched Niven the way people watched cracks in foundations. Sable walked toward him. A few hands moved beneath jackets. Valen's voice cut through the room. No one reaches. Every hand stilled. Sable stopped at the opposite end of the table from Valen, close enough for Riven to see the baby's sleeping face. "Say it again," she repeated, "but this time, look at him when you do it." Riven's gaze flicked to Valen, then back to her. "You misunderstand council language." "No, I understand cowards perfectly." Her voice shook, but not from fear. "You wait until the baby is not in the room to give your ugliness a name." A woman near the middle of the table inhaled sharply. Riven's mouth hardened. "You forget where you are." Sable almost laughed. She looked around the room, at the marble, the carved ceiling, the men who smelled like money and gun oil. "No, I know exactly where I am. I am in a room full of people discussing an infant like he has a problem to solve instead of a child whose parents were stolen from him." Valen's face did not move, but his eyes sharpened. "Good. Let him listen. Let all of them listen." Sable shifted Niven higher against her chest. The baby sighed, warm and trusting, unaware that adults had already tried to make his existence political. "He has his mother's mouth," she said, looking at Riven. "His father's eyes. He likes to sleep with one fist near his face. He gets angry when he's hungry. He cries if the room is too cold. That is who you called a gutter heir." Riven's jaw ticked. "He was born outside the family structure. He was born while your family structure failed him." Silence slammed down. Someone at the table muttered a curse. Sable did not look away from Riven. "He has more honor in one breath than you have in your whole rotten bloodline." The room changed. She felt it instantly, a kind of collective disbelief. Not because she was wrong, because no one talked to Draviks that way and remained standing long enough to blink. Valen rose. The movement was slow, controlled, and somehow more dangerous because of it. Sable, her head turned toward him. For one terrible second she thought he might silence her. He did not. His gaze dropped to Niven, then lifted to the council. "Niven is Kael Dravik's son," he said. Every word landed like stone. Mareva, Valen's elegant aunt, folded her hands on the table. "Valen, we are not disputing your grief, but without formal proof. Proof is being arranged. And until then? Until then, my word is enough," Riven scoffed quietly. Valen's gaze cut to him. The temperature in the room seemed to fall. Riven lowered his eyes, but not before Sable saw the resentment flash there. Valen continued. "Niven will carry the Dravik name publicly." Sable's heart lurched. Her head snapped toward him. "No." The room stirred. Valen looked at her, not angry, warning. She ignored it. "No," she repeated, "you not get to announce that like you're changing the label on a file." Mareva's eyes glittered with satisfaction at the fracture. Valen came around the table. Sable stood her ground. He stopped in front of her, close enough that she could smell the clean bite of his cologne beneath the faint medicinal scent of bandages. "This is not the place," he said quietly. "It became the place when you made my baby a target in front of people who already resent him." A muscle worked in his jaw. He was already a target. He was hidden. He was watched. Valen's voice hardened. "There is a difference." Sable felt the photo from the hospital flash through her mind. Herself hollow-eyed, carrying newborn Niven away from Leora's death while someone watched from across the street. Her grip tightened around the baby. Valen saw fear hit her. His voice lowered further. "A hidden child is easier to kill than a protected heir." She hated the logic, hated it because it was brutal enough to be true. Riven leaned back again. Or perhaps this is exactly what Soren wants. A public claim, a visible weakness, a child in the open. Valen did not turn his head. "Speak again about my nephew as weakness, and I will show you what visible looks like." Riven's mouth closed. Sable looked at Valen. "Nephew." The word went through her differently. Not heir, not proof, not liability. Nephew. Kael's son. Niven fussed, his little face tightening as the tension in the room disturbed him. Sable shifted instinctively, rocking him with small motions. Valen's gaze followed the movement. The room may have been full of Draviks, but for half a second, his attention belonged only to the baby. Something passed across his face then, too quick for most people to catch. Grief. Possession, yes. Protection, absolutely. But grief first. Sable remembered him saying Kael had come into his study terrified and happy. Remembered the list of baby names. Remembered Valen's face when he heard Leora's voice. She still did not trust him, but she believed he had loved his brother. And that mattered, even if she did not want it to. Mareva broke the silence. "If you claim the child, you must account for the woman. The family will not accept an outsider making scenes in council whenever she feels maternal. Sable's eyes narrowed. Valen's voice went flat. The woman kept him alive when we did not know he existed. Mareva's lips thinned. She also shot you. Valen looked at Sable. For some reason she braced. Then he said, she had inaccurate information and excellent motivation. A cough came from somewhere down the table. It might have been a laugh strangled before survival instincts killed it. Sable stared at him. You are defending me? No, Valen said. I am clarifying the quality of your crime. Despite everything, despite the room, despite the fear clawing at her throat, Sable almost smiled. Almost. Valen turned back to the council. The announcement will be made when I choose. The DNA confirmation will be secured privately. Until then, Niven remains under my protection. Sable remains with him, and anyone who has difficulty accepting either truth can bring that difficulty to me directly. No one spoke. The meeting was over because Valen had decided it was over. People rose slowly, carefully, resentment polished beneath manners. As they filed out, Riven passed close enough for Sable to smell his expensive soap. He did not look at Niven. He looked at her. You should be careful, he murmured. Women who mistake themselves for family rarely survive the correction. Sable met his stare. I already survived childbirth from the wrong side of the bed, poverty, grief, and shooting your Dawn. You will have to be more interesting than careful. His eyes flashed. Then Valen was there, not touching Riven, not touching Sable. Just there. Riven stepped away. Smart man. When the room emptied, Sable released a breath she had not realized she was holding. Valen closed the council doors. The click sounded final. Then he turned on her. Do you make a habit of walking into rooms full of armed men and insulting their ancestry? Sable lifted her chin. Only when they insult my baby. Your baby? Her eyes sharpened. Valen corrected himself immediately. Niven? The fight softened before it could fully ignite. Sable looked down at the child between them. Niven's eyes had opened, dark and unfocused, his tiny mouth working like he was considering another complaint. He is not a banner, she said quietly. He is not revenge for Kael. He is not proof. He is not your family's redemption. I know. Do you? She looked up. Because when you say Dravik name, all I hear is danger. Valen stepped closer, slow enough not to corner her. When I say Dravik name, I mean every man who hears it understands the cost of touching him, and every enemy knows where to aim. His gaze darkened. Yes. The honesty hurt. Sable's throat tightened. Then how am I supposed to sleep? You do not. She let out a bitter laugh. Comforting. I told you the truth, not a lullaby. She wanted to slap him. She also wanted, shamefully, for him to lie just once. To say everything would be fine. That Niven would grow up safe. That no more dead things would be left at doors. That Leora's child would not spend his life paying for a name he had not asked to inherit. Valen seemed to read enough of that on her face. His voice changed. Sable. She hated when he said her name like it was something he had decided to protect. I cannot make his blood safe, he said, but I can make anyone who comes for it regret being born. A chill moved through her. Not fear, not exactly. There was horror in his promise, yes, but also shelter, dark shelter, violent shelter, the only kind his world knew how to offer. Niven blinked up at him. Valen looked down. The Don's face shifted. He did not smile, did not soften in any obvious way, but his eyes changed. Sable saw it, and because she saw it, she looked away. He needs to eat, she said. Valen nodded once and opened the door for her. Back in the nursery, Sable fed Niven in the armchair near the window, while 2 guards stood beyond the hall, and the estate moved around her like a sleeping beast. Her body was exhausted from confrontation. Her mind would not quiet. A gutter air. She looked down at Niven's little face and felt tears rise, furious and useless. You are not gutter anything, she whispered. Do you hear me? You are loved. You were loved before you were born. His tiny hand flexed against her finger. Sable bent and kissed his knuckles. I will not let them make you small. A phone buzzed on the side table. Not hers, Valen's. He must have left it there when the doctor came earlier. Sable froze. The screen lit. Unknown number. A photo filled the display. For 1 second, her mind refused to understand what she was seeing. Then it did. Herself outside the hospital the day Leora died. Hair wild, face destroyed. Niven wrapped in a thin blue blanket against her chest. The angle was closer than the first photo, much closer. Someone had been near enough to see the tear on her cheek. A message appeared beneath it. I watched her die. I watched you take the baby. I can watch him next. The phone slipped from Sable's hand and hit the rug. Niven startled and began to cry. Valen appeared in the doorway almost instantly, as if the sound of fear had summoned him faster than any guard. What happened? Sable could not speak. She pointed to the phone. Valen crossed the room, picked it up, and read. Whatever was left of warmth in his face vanished. The man who had defended Niven in council disappeared. The dawn stood there instead. Cold, silent, final. Sable clutched the baby to her chest, terror squeezing her ribs until every breath scraped. Valen looked at the photograph, then at Niven, then at Sable. They were close, she whispered, his eyes lifted. I know. They were right there. Valen's hand closed around the phone so tightly she thought the glass might crack. When he spoke, his voice was terrifyingly calm. Then they are close enough to bleed. Chapter 7. Sable woke because the room was too quiet. Not peaceful. Wrong. Her eyes opened into darkness, and for one slippery second, she forgot where she was. The ceiling was too high. The sheets beneath her were too soft. The air smelled faintly of lavender and polished wood instead of old radiator dust and baby formula. Then memory returned. The Dravik estate. The council. The hospital photograph. The message. I can watch him next. Sable sat up so fast the blanket slid to her waist. Her gaze flew to the bassinet beside the bed. Empty. The sound that left her was not a scream. It was worse, a small, strangled break in her throat, the kind of sound a body made before the mind could form a prayer. She lunged from the bed, bare feet hitting the cold floor. Niven? No answer. The bassinet blanket was rumpled. The tiny knit cap he hated lay on its side. The room was dim, curtains drawn, shadows pressed into every corner. Sable's heart slammed against her ribs so hard she thought it might crack something. No. She ran to the nursery door and threw it open. The hallway guard turned sharply. Miss Arvessa. Where is he? The guard's eyes flicked once toward the nursery wing. That was all she needed. Sable shoved past him and ran. Marble chilled her soles. Her hair fell wild around her face. She barely felt the ache in her body or the burn in her lungs. All she could hear was the empty bassinet. All she could see was Leora's dead face. All she could think was that she had promised. She had promised. If anything happened to Niven, there would be no Sable left to survive it. She reached the nursery and stopped in the doorway. The room was lit by one low lamp near the rocking chair. Valen Dravik stood by the window with Niven in his arms. For half a second, Sable could not understand the image. The Don wore no jacket, only a black shirt with the sleeves rolled to his forearms. His injured shoulder was still bandaged beneath the fabric, making one side of him careful and stiff. His hair was damp, as if he had washed and come straight here. His face was shadowed, tired, bare of the polished cruelty he wore downstairs, and against his chest, Niven slept, not perfectly, not deeply, but safely. His small face was turned toward Valen's throat, one fist tucked beneath his chin, his little body rising and falling beneath the pale blanket. Sable's terror cracked into fury because fury was the only way to hide how close she had come to falling apart. Give him to me. Valen turned. His eyes moved over her quickly, taking in her bare feet, her shaking hands, the panic still tearing through her breathing. He was crying. I said, give him to me. His jaw tightened, but he crossed the room slowly and lowered Niven toward her. Sable took the baby too fast, clutching him to her chest with one hand behind his head, the other spread wide across his back. She pressed her mouth to his hair, his temple, his tiny warm cheek. You don't take him from my room, she said, voice trembling. You don't move him without telling me. You don't let me wake up and find him gone. Valen stood very still. You were asleep. So wake me. You had not slept more than an hour in 2 days. I don't care. I do. The words landed too cleanly. Sable looked up. Valen's face gave nothing away, but the room seemed to hold its breath after him. She hated that her own breath stumbled. You don't get to care like that, she whispered. His gaze sharpened. Like what? Like you have rights to my exhaustion. A muscle moved in his jaw. No, I have a responsibility to the child. And me? The question slipped out before she could stop it. The second it entered the room, she wanted to snatch it back. Valen did not answer at once. That was the problem. If he had mocked her, she could have hated him. If he had dismissed her, she could have locked herself back into anger. Instead, his eyes moved over her face with an intensity that made the air feel too warm. "You are standing between him and the world," he said at last. "That makes you difficult to separate from the responsibility." Sable laughed softly, but it shook on the way out. "That is the most romantic thing anyone has ever said to me." "I was not being romantic." "I know, that's what made it terrible." Something almost moved at the corner of his mouth. Almost. Niven fussed between them, irritated by the tension, his tiny brows pulling together. Sable looked down and saw that Valen had wrapped the blanket wrong, one side too tight, the other loose. Niven's arm had escaped and was waving weakly, like he meant to file a complaint. Despite everything, despite the panic still clawing at her, Sable exhaled. She gave the baby back to him. "You're holding him like a stolen grenade." Vin looked down at the baby. "He feels more dangerous. He is 8 pounds. He controls more people in this house than I do." That did it. A laugh broke out of her before she could stop it. Small, tired, almost painful, but real. Valen looked at her like the sound had struck somewhere under his ribs. Sable noticed and immediately looked away. "Here," she muttered. "If you insist on kidnapping babies from bassinets, at least learn to do it properly." She shifted Niven carefully and stepped closer. Valen did not reach for him, not at first. He looked at Sable, asking without words for permission he could have taken by force but did not. That, more than anything, made her throat tighten. She placed Niven back into his arms. "Support his head," she said, guiding Valen's hand higher. "Not like that. Here." Her fingers closed around his wrist. He went still beneath her touch. Sable felt it. The heat of his skin, the strength in the bones beneath her palm, the restraint in him, so absolute it was almost another body in the room. She adjusted his arm, sliding his hand beneath Niven's neck. "There, and don't hold him away from you like he's evidence. Bring him closer." Valen obeyed. Slowly, carefully. Niven settled against his chest again, his cheek pressing into the black fabric of Valen's shirt. The Don looked down at him with an expression so foreign on his face, Sable almost did not know what to call it. Fear, maybe. Not of enemies, not of bullets, of breaking something gentle. "He is so small," Valen said. "They usually are." Kael would have panicked. Sable's breath caught. Valen did not look at her. His gaze stayed on Niven. He pretended he didn't care for children. He continued quietly. Loud rooms annoyed him. Sticky hands offended him. He claimed babies looked like angry old men. A smile touched Sable's mouth before grief could stop it. Leora said the same thing. Valen's eyes shifted to her. "She did?" "She said newborns look like old men who had seen too much and refused to forgive anyone for it." Sable looked down at Niven. "Then she cried the first time she felt him kick." Valen's throat moved. The silence that followed was not empty. It was crowded with the dead. Sable saw Leora in it, barefoot, laughing, hopeful in a way that now hurt to remember. Valen saw Kael. She could tell by the way his eyes darkened but did not harden. "Kael came to me with a list of names," he said. He tried to pretend it was strategic. Strategic? He said a child of Dravik blood needed a name that could survive being shouted across a battlefield. Sable looked at Niven and laughed under her breath. "He chose Niven?" He said it sounded soft enough for Leora and strong enough for him. Valen paused. "Then he asked if I thought she would say yes." Sable's chest tightened. "To marriage?" Valen nodded once. The room blurred. Sable swallowed hard. "She would have," she whispered. "Even after everything. If he had come back, she would have forgiven him before he finished explaining." "He would have spent the rest of his life begging," Valen said, "even though he did nothing wrong." That sentence should have been bitter. It was not. It was mourning. Sable looked at him, then really looked at him, at the tightness around his mouth, at the bruised exhaustion beneath his eyes, at the way he held Niven like a man holding the last living piece of his brother and trying not to bleed on it. "You loved him," she said. Valen's eyes stayed on the baby. "He was my little brother." The simplicity of it ruined her more than a confession would have. Sable blinked, but the tear slipped anyway. She tried to wipe it before he saw. He saw. Valen shifted Niven carefully into the crook of one arm and lifted his good hand. Sable should have stepped back. She did not. His thumb touched her cheek, catching the tear before it reached her jaw. The contact was light, almost nothing, Rough skin, careful pressure, warmth where she had only expected danger. Sable's breath caught. Valen's gaze dropped to her mouth. The whole room changed. Not suddenly, not like lightning, like heat gathering beneath closed doors. Sable felt every inch between them, the baby asleep against Valen's chest, the warm lamplight, the smell of clean cotton, milk, and the faint smoke of the dying fire somewhere beyond the hallway. Her bare feet on the rug, his thumb still near her cheek. "This is grief," she whispered, but her voice did not convince even her. Valen's eyes came back to hers. "No," he said, "grief does not look at me like that." Her heart slammed once. Hard. His name came out softer than she meant it to. His face changed at the sound. Not much. Enough. His hand lowered from her cheek to the side of her neck, not holding, not claiming, just resting there as if he needed to feel her pulse to believe she was real. Sable's eyes fluttered for half a second. The tenderness of it terrified her. This man had blood on his hands, power in his name, enemies closing around a baby she loved more than breath. And still, standing in the nursery beside the crib, all she could think was that she had been alone for so long. Too long. Valen leaned closer, slowly, giving her every chance to move. She did not. His forehead almost touched hers. His breath warmed her lips. The distance between them narrowed until it became a question neither of them was brave enough to answer aloud. Niven stirred, a soft sound, barely more than a sigh, but it cut through Sable like a church bell. She stepped back, fast. Valen's hand fell away. The air rushed cold between them. "This cannot happen," she said. Her voice shook. Valen looked at her for one long second, and the darkness in his eyes made her wonder if stepping back had cost him too. "I know." But neither of them sounded relieved. Sable reached for Niven, and Valen handed him over without argument. Their hands brushed in the exchange. The touch lasted less than a second. It was enough to make her hate herself a little. She cradled the baby, pressing him close as if he could anchor her back to sense. "We are not doing this," she said, more to herself than to him. "No," Valen said. A pause, then lower, rougher. "Not tonight." Her eyes snapped to his. Before she could answer, footsteps pounded down the hall. Not walking, running. Valen turned before the guard appeared, already changed. The softness vanished so completely it almost felt imagined. A man burst into the nursery doorway, breathing hard, one hand at his earpiece. "Dawn." Valen's voice became ice. "Speak." The guard's eyes flicked to Sable, then Niven. "East gate is open." Valen went very still. The guard swallowed. "Someone is already inside." Chapter 8. The nursery lights died before Sable could scream. 1 second. Valen was standing between her and the guard, his body turned slightly toward the door, all softness stripped from him until nothing remained but the dawn. The next, the room went black. Niven startled in her arms. His tiny body jerked against her chest, and then he began to cry. Not a hungry cry, not a tired cry, a frightened, wounded little sound that ripped every reasonable thought out of Sable's head and left only one command behind: protect him. Valen moved before the alarm sounded. His hand found Sable in the darkness, not rough, not searching blindly. Precise. Warm fingers closing around her upper arm for half a second, guiding her back from the doorway as red emergency light flooded the hall. "Inside," he said. "What?" "The safe closet. Now." The guard at the door raised his weapon. Static hissed from his earpiece. Somewhere far below, glass shattered. Then came the first gunshot. The sound cracked through the estate like thunder trapped inside stone. Sable flinched hard, clutching Niven tighter. Valen's eyes cut to her, black in the red glow. "Do not freeze on me." "I'm not." Another shot. Closer. The nursery windows trembled. Valen crossed the room, shoved aside a framed painting near the wardrobe, and pressed his palm against a panel hidden in the wall. A narrow door clicked open. Behind it was a small reinforced room, no larger than a walk-in closet, stocked with water, blankets, a phone, and enough darkness to swallow her whole. Sable stared at it. Every instinct rebelled. A box, a cage, a place where she would be trapped if the wrong person opened it. Valen saw the refusal forming on her face. "Sable, no." His jaw clenched. "This is not the time to hate me. I'm not leaving you out here." The words came out before she could stop them. For one flashing second, something crossed his face. Not surprise exactly. Something worse. Recognition. Then he buried it. "You are taking Niven inside," he said. "That is the only thing that matters. You're bleeding already. I am breathing already too. I can multitask." Valen, he stepped closer, fast enough to silence her, but not enough to scare the baby more. His voice dropped low, hard, intimate. Listen to me. If they get past me, you do not beg. You do not negotiate. You do not open this door unless you hear my voice say your sister's name. Sable's throat closed. Leora, he nodded once. That is the word. Her eyes burned. Gunfire erupted again, followed by shouting from the hall. Valen touched Niven's blanket just once, the backs of his fingers brushing the baby's curled fist. Then he looked at Sable. Lock it! She wanted to argue. She wanted to grab him by his black shirt and drag him into the closet with them. She wanted the world to stop taking people at doorways. Instead, she stepped inside. Valen shut the hidden door between them. The lock sealed with a heavy metallic click. Darkness swallowed her. For a moment, all Sable could hear was Niven. His cries bounced off the narrow walls, his warm face pressed against her neck, wet with tears. She sank to the floor, pulling a blanket around him, though the room was not cold. Shh, she whispered, rocking him with tiny, desperate movements. I have you. I have you. I promised your mama. I have you. The safe room smelled like metal, dust, and stored water. Outside, the estate came apart. Boots thundered past the nursery. Men shouted in sharp, clipped commands. Shots fired in bursts, then stopped, then fired again. Something heavy crashed into a wall close enough that Sable felt it through the floor. Niven cried harder. Sable put her mouth near his ear. Listen to me, baby, she whispered, though her own voice shook. You are not going anywhere. Do you hear me? Not with them, not with anyone. You stay with me. Her hand covered the back of his head, so small, so unbearably small. He had no idea men were killing each other over his blood. He knew, only sound and fear and the arms holding him. He knew only that his safe place was shaking. Sable pressed her cheek to his hair. In the darkness, Leora's face came back to her. Not the hospital bed. Before that. Leora standing in the kitchen with one hand on her belly, smiling despite everything. If anything happens to me, you'll love him enough for both of us, won't you? Sable had snapped at her then. Told her not to talk like that. Told her she was being dramatic and pregnant and impossible. She had not said yes, she had not needed to. Her life had become the answer. A sound cut through the nursery, not gunfire. The nursery door opening. Sable stopped breathing. Niven hiccuped against her neck. A man stepped inside. She could not see him, but she heard him. Boots on the rug. Slow, careful, not one of Valen's men. Valen's guards moved with purpose. This man moved like he was hunting. Glass crunched beneath his shoe. A drawer opened, then another. The crib rail creaked. He was searching the crib. Sable's blood turned to ice. Niven made a soft, breathy sound. Sable clamped one hand gently over his back, not his mouth, never his mouth, and rocked once, barely moving. Quiet, she breathed soundlessly into his hair. Please, please, please. Outside the hidden panel, the man stilled. Had he heard? Sable's heartbeat slammed so loudly she was sure it would betray them. Then came the scrape of metal. He was near the wall, near the painting, near the hidden door. Sable looked around the dark closet, frantic. No gun, no knife, only water bottles, blankets, a flashlight, and a heavy metal emergency crank mounted near the bottom shelf. Her fingers closed around the crank. The hidden door clicked. No. It opened 2 inches. A sliver of red emergency light spilled across the floor. A gloved hand appeared. Sable moved before fear could slow her. She pushed Niven onto the blanket pile behind her, turned, and drove the metal crank into the man's wrist with every ounce of strength she had. Bone cracked. He cursed, the door flying wider. Sable surged up and slammed her shoulder into him, catching him off guard. He stumbled into the nursery, and she followed because if he got his balance, he would reach past her. Not happening. Never happening. He wore a black mask and carried a blade in one hand, his other wrist hanging wrong. Sable hit him again with the crank. He grabbed her hair. Pain exploded across her scalp. She screamed, not from pain but rage, and drove her knee upward, catching him low enough that he doubled with a choked sound. You don't touch my baby, she snarled. He backhanded her. Her head snapped to the side. Stars burst across her vision. She hit the rug hard, tasting blood. Niven screamed from inside the closet. The man turned toward the sound. Sable saw red. She grabbed the nearest thing, a ceramic lamp from the nursery table, and threw herself at him from behind. The lamp shattered against his head. He staggered, one hand catching the crib. She clawed at his mask, his eyes, his throat. She was not trained, she was not elegant. She fought like grief given teeth. He shoved her off. Sable crashed into the rocking chair. The world tilted. The masked man lifted the blade. Then Valen entered the room. No warning, no shout, just a blur of black shirt, fury, and violence. He seized the attacker by the back of the neck and slammed him into the wall, hard enough to crack the plaster. The man swung the blade wildly. Valen blocked, but not fast enough. Steel sliced across his side, low beneath the ribs. Sable saw the blood before Valen reacted. Dark. Immediate. Too much. Valen! His name ripped from her throat. Valen's face did not change. He drove his fist into the attacker's throat, then twisted the man's arm until the blade dropped to the rug. Another brutal movement, another crack, and the attacker collapsed. But Valen staggered. Just once. Enough. Sable scrambled to her feet and ran to the closet first. Niven lay on the blanket pile, red-faced and screaming, untouched. Relief nearly dropped her to her knees. She scooped him up, held him to her chest, then turned back. Valen had one hand braced against the wall. Blood spread beneath his palm. His breathing was shallow. "You idiot," she choked. His eyes lifted to hers. "You have a strange way of thanking people." "You are bleeding. You keep saying that to me. Because you keep doing it." He tried to straighten. Failed. Sable laid Niven in the crib because the immediate threat was down and her hands were needed elsewhere. The baby screamed at being released, but Sable leaned over him fast, pressing a kiss to his forehead. "1 second. 1 second, baby. I'm right here." Then she tore one of the clean blankets from the shelf and rushed back to Valen. "Sit down." "No." "Sit down, or I swear to God I will finish what I started when I first saw you." His brow furrowed through the pain. "When?" "Shut up and sit." Maybe it was the blood loss. Maybe it was the sheer absurdity of them. But Valen gave in. He sank to the floor near the wall, jaw clenched so hard a vein stood out in his neck. Sable dropped beside him and pressed the folded blanket against the wound. He hissed. She pressed harder. "Stay with me," she snapped. "I am not dying on a nursery rug." "You don't get to decide that. I decide most things. Not this." His eyes found hers. In the red emergency light, his face looked carved from pain and shadow. But his gaze was clear, focused on her like the room could burn down, and he would still notice if her hands shook. They were shaking. Badly. He lifted his bloody hand and covered her fingers where they pressed the blanket to his side. Not to move them, to steady them. The gesture undid something in her chest. "You're hurt," he said. "I'm fine." His thumb brushed over the corner of her mouth where the attacker had split her lip. Sable froze. "Liar," he murmured. Her breath caught. Behind them, Niven cried in sharp, furious bursts. Gunfire still echoed somewhere in the estate, but farther now. Distant enough that the nursery felt suspended outside time, full of smoke, blood, and things neither of them could afford to name. Valen's hand dropped back to hers. His voice roughened. "I will not leave you with another grave." Sable's eyes burned. "Then stop bleeding like you're trying to prove a point." For one breath, his mouth almost curved. Then footsteps pounded toward the nursery. Valen's hand moved instinctively toward where a weapon should have been. "Dravik!" A guard called from outside. "Secure!" Marek appeared in the doorway, face grim, gun raised until he saw Valen on the floor. "Doctor?" He barked over his shoulder. "Now!" 2 guards dragged another man into the nursery, not the one Valen had dropped. This attacker was alive, beaten, bloodied, laughing through broken teeth. Valen's eyes went flat. Sable kept pressure on his wound, but she looked at the prisoner. The man spat blood onto the marble threshold. "You built high walls, Don," he rasped. "Locked every gate, counted every enemy." Valen said nothing. The attacker smiled wider. "But you forgot the one thing about family." Marek struck him hard enough to snap his head sideways. The man laughed again, wet and ugly. Sable felt the room go cold. Valen's hand closed over hers. The attacker lifted his swollen eyes and looked directly at him. "The traitor sleeps under the Dravik roof." Chapter 9. Valen Dravik walked into the council room with blood beneath his shirt and murder in his eyes. No one spoke. Not the uncles who had spent all morning whispering in corners. Not Mareva, seated with her diamonds at her throat, as if elegance could protect her from the stink of betrayal. Not Riven, lounging near the far end of the table with one ankle crossed over the other, pretending boredom while a traitor's secret beat too loudly beneath his skin. Sable saw it before she understood why. The twitch in his fingers, the way his gaze touched Valen's bandaged side, then slid away too fast. The way he refused to look at Niven's empty chair near the wall, the chair Sable dragged there herself as a reminder that this entire room existed because a baby had nearly been taken from his crib. Niven was not in the room. Never again. He was upstairs under triple guard, with Marek outside the nursery door, a doctor inside the wing, and enough locked steel around him to make the estate feel less like a home than a bunker. Still, Sable's arms felt wrong without him. Empty. Useless. She stood near the wall, bruised lip throbbing, hair tied back too tightly, one hand wrapped around her opposite wrist so no one could see how badly her fingers wanted to shake. Valen had told her to rest. She had looked at his bandages, his pale face, the blood that had seeped through the fresh dressing beneath his black suit, and told him to go first. He had not argued after that. Now he stood at the head of the council table, wounded and upright, every inch of him colder than the marble beneath their feet. The doors closed behind him. Locked. The sound moved through the room like a sentence. "No one leaves," Valen said, "until I know which one of you opened my gates." A chair creaked. Someone swallowed. Riven smiled faintly. "You cannot possibly believe one of us would invite Soren Vaskari's animals into our home." Valen's eyes moved to him. "I believe many things before breakfast." "This is paranoia. This is arithmetic." Valen set a thin black folder on the table. 2 exterior cameras failed 8 seconds before the east gate opened. The gate code used belongs to family-level clearance. The nursery wing route was chosen by someone familiar with internal guard rotation. His voice lowered. "And one of the attackers was kind enough to survive long enough to confirm what the evidence already told me." Mareva's face tightened. "A tortured man will say anything." Valen did not look at her. "Then let us not rely on his mouth." He opened the folder. Photographs slid across the table. Gate access logs, security stills, a printed map of the estate marked in red. Sable watched the room react. Shock from some, fear from others, carefully arranged outrage from those who had practiced it. Riven barely glanced at the evidence. That was the first real mistake. A guilty man avoided proof because he already knew what it said. Sable looked at Valen. He had noticed too. But when Valen's gaze flicked briefly toward her, she understood something else. He knew she had noticed, and he trusted her to keep watching. That small, silent trust settled in Sable's chest like a blade handed hilt first. Valen placed both hands on the table. Pain flashed across his face so quickly most would miss it. Sable did not. She hated that she wanted to step forward. She hated more that she stayed where she was, because he needed the room to see the dawn, not the wounded man. "Kael died because someone gave Soren his route," Valen said. The air changed. Riven's fingers stopped moving. There. Sable's eyes narrowed. Valen continued. "Leora Arvessa was fed a lie using details only someone close to Kael would know. Niven was watched from the day he left the hospital. Last night, the attack came directly to the nursery." Mareva whispered. "Valen." "No," his voice cracked like a whip. "We are finished dressing rot in family language." Sable's heart beat harder. She thought of Leora's recording. The man's voice. Soren's voice. "Kael Dravik called you a pretty mistake." She thought of Kael's baby name list. She thought of Niven screaming from inside the hidden closet while an attacker searched the crib. Her eyes returned to Riven. He was looking at her now. Not Valen. Her. And in his gaze was not fear, it was hatred. As if she had ruined the ending he had planned. Sable let him see that she knew. His mouth tightened. Valen shifted the room with one sentence. "Niven will be moved at dawn." Sable's stomach dropped. Her head turned toward him before she could stop herself. "What?" Valen did not look at her. He kept his eyes on the table, voice controlled, almost casual. "Only those in this room will know the route. 3 vehicles, 2 decoys. The child leaves through the south service corridor." Sable's pulse stumbled. For 1 second she thought he had lost his mind. Then she saw Riven's left hand curl against his thigh. Not fear, calculation. Valen was lying. No, not lying. Baiting. Sable forced her face still. It was harder than she expected. Every maternal instinct screamed at her to protest the mention of moving Niven. But this was not about Niven leaving. This was about who would carry the fake route out of the room. Valen straightened. "If anyone speaks of this outside these walls, I will know." Riven gave a soft laugh. "You suspect us all then?" Valen's gaze landed on him again. I suspect the one who feels addressed. The silence after that was delicious and dangerous. The meeting ended without truly ending. Valen unlocked the doors. No one left quickly. Draviks were too proud to flee. They drifted out in pairs and singles, wrapped in offense and unease. Riven was among the last. As he passed Sable, he slowed. You look tired, he murmured. She smiled without warmth. You look nervous. His eyes sharpened. Careful, little mother. Sable stepped closer before sense could stop her. I am so tired of men saying careful to women while hiding behind rooms full of guns. Riven's mouth curved. You think standing beside Valen makes you dangerous? No, she leaned in just enough that only he could hear. Burying my sister did that. For 1 second, the mask slipped. There it was. Disgust, fear, rage. Then Riven walked away. Sable watched him go until Valen's voice came behind her. You provoke killers often? She did not turn. Only the boring ones. You think he is boring? I think he is guilty. Valen stepped up beside her, not close enough to touch, but close enough that she felt the heat of him anyway. Why? He listened to the evidence like a man hearing a song he already knew. Valen looked down the empty hall where Riven had gone. Good. Her eyes lifted to him. Good? I needed to know if you saw what I saw. Something in her chest tightened. You used me too. His gaze returned to her. No, I trusted you. That was worse. Better. Both. Before she could answer, Marek appeared at the end of the hall with a phone in his hand. Don. Valen took it. He listened for less than 10 seconds. His expression did not change, but Sable felt the room around him go colder. Play it here, he said. Marek tapped the screen. Riven's voice filled the hallway, low and urgent. The child moves at dawn. South Service Corridor. 3 vehicles. I want my payment before Valen realizes. Another voice cut in. Smooth. Poisonous. Soren Vaskari. You will get paid when Dravik bleeds properly. The recording ended. Sable's hand flew to her mouth. Not in shock. To keep from screaming. Valen looked at Marek. Bring him. Riven was dragged into the council room 20 minutes later with blood at the corner of his mouth and 2 of Valen's men holding his arms. His expensive calm was gone. So was the boredom. Now he looked like exactly what he was. A man who had gambled with dead people's lives and realized the house had never been his. Valen stood before him. Sable stood near the door. She should not have been there. Everyone's eyes told her so. Valen did not send her away, Riven noticed. It made him angrier. You let her witness family discipline now? Riven spat. How sentimental. Valen's voice was quiet. You helped Soren kill Kael. Riven laughed once. Ugly. Kael killed himself the day he decided that girl mattered. Sable stopped breathing. Valen moved so fast she barely saw it. One moment, Riven was laughing. The next, Valen's hand was around his throat, slamming him back against the wall hard enough to shake a painting loose. Every guard in the room froze. Valen's wound had to be screaming. His face showed nothing. Say her name, he said. Riven choked. Valen tightened his grip. Say it. Riven's eyes bulged. Leora. Sable's vision blurred red. Valen released him only enough to let him breathe. Riven coughed, then smiled through it, reckless now because exposed men often mistook ruin for freedom. She was nothing, he rasped. A pretty little distraction for a weak little prince. Kael would have thrown away alliances, roots, blood, all for a girl with no name worth carrying. Sable moved before she knew she had. Valen caught her around the waist, not gently, firmly, holding her back as she lunged for Riven with a sound that did not feel human. Let me go, she snarled. No. He broke her. Valen's voice dropped beside her ear. Not with your hands. She fought him once, furious, shaking. Riven smiled at her over Valen's shoulder. That smile nearly undid her. Some punishments, Valen said, his arm like iron around her middle, are mine. Sable went still, not calm, never calm, but still, because there was something in his voice that told her Riven would not escape Leora's name unscarred. Valen released her only when she stopped pulling. Riven spat blood onto the floor. You think this ends with me? Soren wants the boy, or the claim withdrawn. He will offer proof. Bodies, names, everything. All you have to do is admit Kael's bastard was never family. The room seemed to pulse. Sable's voice came low and cold before Valen could answer. Say that word again. Riven looked at her. She stepped forward this time, and Valen did not stop her. She stopped close enough to see the sweat at Riven's temple. That baby was loved before he was born, she said. His mother died bringing him here. His father died trying to get back to him. You are the only bastard in this room. Riven's face twisted. Valen looked at her then. Something unreadable passed through his eyes. Respect, maybe, or something more dangerous because it felt warmer. Marek stepped in. Soren sent terms, chapel, midnight. He wants the woman present. Valen's head snapped toward him. No, Sable turned. Yes. The word left them both at once, opposite and absolute. Valen faced her fully. You are not going. I am. No, she laughed, but there was no humor in it. You do not get to know me out of my own grief. Soren wants you there because he knows your pain is usable. Then let him choke on it. His eyes flared. This is not courage, it is exposure. And hiding worked so well? Her voice rose. Leora hid. Kael was buried. Neven was hunted in a nursery. I am done waiting in rooms while men decide how much of my life I'm allowed to witness. Valen stepped closer. You think I am trying to belittle you? I think you are trying to protect me from a story I entered before you even knew it existed. That hit. She saw it. Good. Sable held his stare. I buried Leora. I raised Neven. I shot you. Stop treating me like I came late to this war. The room went silent. Valen's eyes searched her face, and for once she could not tell whether he wanted to argue or touch her. He did neither. Slowly, he nodded. Then stand beside me, he said. Not in front of me. Sable's breath caught. It should not have felt like a vow. It did. Hours later, she dressed in black. Not silk. Not armor. Just a simple black dress someone had left in her suite, with sleeves that covered the bruise blooming across her arm, and a bay neckline high enough to feel like control. In the nursery, Neven slept under warm light, one fist tucked near his mouth. Sable bent over the crib and kissed his forehead. This is for your mother, she whispered. For your father. For you. When she stepped into the hall, Valen waited. Black suit, pale face, fresh bandage beneath his jacket. Eyes dark enough to make men reconsider betrayal. His gaze moved over her once, not like Riven, not like ownership, like he understood she had chosen to walk into fire and hated that he respected it. You are sure? He asked. No, she said, but I'm going. Valen offered his arm. Sable looked at it, then took it. Together they entered the private chapel where Soren Vaskari waited beneath stained glass and candlelight. The man at the altar smiled when he saw her. Not at Valen, at her, like he had been waiting since the day Leora died. Chapter 10. Soren Vaskari said Leora's name like he had kept it under his tongue just to poison Sable with it. Leora Arvessa, he murmured from the altar, smiling beneath the stained glass saints. She cried beautifully. Valen's entire body went still beside her. Not frozen, restrained. There was a difference, and Sable felt it in the arm she held, the sudden iron beneath his sleeve, the tightening of muscle, the violence that rose in him like a black tide and stopped only because he ordered it to. The chapel smelled of incense, old stone, candle wax, and gun oil, holy and murderous. Men stood in the shadows between the pews. Some belonged to Valen, some belonged to Soren. All of them held themselves like the room was one wrong breath away from becoming a grave. Sable should have been afraid. Maybe she was, but fear had changed shape inside her. It no longer made her small. It made her clear. She looked at Soren Vaskari and saw the man who had turned her sister's love into a weapon. The man who had killed Kael, fed Leora lies, watched Sable carry Neven out of the hospital, then sent threats to a baby because cruelty was the only language he spoke fluently. He was handsome in a polished, poisonous way. Silver dark hair, elegant suit, a mouth that smiled without warmth. He looked like a man who had never held a dying woman's hand. That was why he could speak so easily. Say her name again, Sable said, voice low, and I'll make you wish Valen got to you first. Soren's smile widened. Ah, there she is, the grieving sister with a borrowed spine. Valen shifted forward. Sable's hand tightened on his arm, not to stop him because Soren deserved mercy, to stop him because Soren wanted haste. Valen felt the warning in her touch and remained where he stood. Soren noticed, his eyes brightened. How touching, he said. The dawn takes guidance now. Valen's voice came quiet and deadly. You asked for her here. Speak to her. I intend to. Soren stepped down from the altar. Because she deserves truth from at least one man in this room. Sable almost laughed. Truth? Yes. His gaze settled on her face. You think Valen Dravik is different because he did not rip the child from your arms yet. You think restraint is kindness. It is not. It is strategy. Sable's stomach tightened despite herself. Soren saw it. Men like him watched for wounds because they had no other way to enter. He will take the boy, Soren continued. Maybe not tonight, maybe not tomorrow, but eventually blood will outweigh sentiment. It always does in families like his. Valen said nothing. That silence hurt more than Sable wanted to admit. Soren drifted closer, his voice softer now, almost gentle. Men like Valen do not protect, they possess. He will wrap the cage in silk, call it safety, and one day you will wake up to find Niven surrounded by Dravik tutors, Dravik guards, Dravik rules, and you will be nothing but the woman who kept him alive until his real family came. The words found the old fear with terrifying precision. The bassinet empty, the nursery guarded, the council table, the Dravik name closing around Niven like a fist. Sable's hand loosened on Valen's arm. Just a little. Enough, Soren smiled. Then Valen moved, not towards Soren, away from Sable. One step, a deliberate surrender of space. Sable looked at him, startled. Valen's eyes were on her. Not Soren, not the men, not the guns, her. I could take him, he said. The honesty hit the chapel like a slap. Sable's breath caught. Valen did not soften the truth. With my name, my money, my men, this world would hand him to me if I demanded it. It would call it blood. It would call it legacy. It would call it order. Soren's smile thinned. Valen kept looking at Sable. But I will not. The chapel went deathly quiet. Sable's throat tightened. Valen's voice lowered. Niven remains with you because you are his mother in every way that matters. You held him when he had nothing but grief waiting for him. You fed him when pride would have been easier than asking. You put your body between him and men with knives. You loved him before my family knew his name. Sable blinked hard, but the tears came anyway. Valen did not look away. I will protect him, he said. I will protect you. But I will not own either of you. Something inside Sable broke open. Not pain this time. Something warmer. Something terrible. Because it asked her to trust after trust had cost her sister everything. Soren's voice sharpened. Pretty speech. Sable turned to him. No, she said. That was the first honest thing anyone powerful has ever said in front of me. Soren's eyes cooled. She stepped away from Valen now, not because she doubted him, because she no longer needed to hide behind him. You used my sister's pain because you thought love made women stupid, she said. Soren's jaw flexed. You thought if Leora loved Kael, you could break her with his absence. You thought if I loved Niven, you could scare me into handing him over. You thought grief would make me blind. Her voice steadied. You were wrong. It made me dangerous. Valen's gaze burned at the side of her face. Soren's smile disappeared. Dangerous? He repeated. You are a woman who shot the wrong man because she could not tell one Dravik from another. Sable stepped closer. And still somehow you are the one trapped in a chapel. A soft sound moved through the shadows. Not laughter exactly, recognition. Soren's eyes flicked to Valen. Valen finally smiled. It was small, cold, lethal. You should have aimed your fear at her sooner, he said. She notices things men like you dismiss. Soren's expression changed. Too late. Valen lifted one hand. The chapel doors opened. Marek entered with two men dragging Riven Dravik between them. Riven's face was bruised, his mouth split, but his eyes were alive with panic. Soren's composure cracked. Just slightly. Enough for everyone to see. Valen took a small black device from his pocket and pressed give play. Riven's recorded voice filled the chapel. The child moves at dawn. South Service Corridor, 3 vehicles. I want my payment before Valen realizes. Then Soren's own voice. You will get paid when Dravik bleeds properly. The silence afterward was thick enough to choke on. Valen looked at Soren. You buried my brother. I buried your future before you walked in. Soren's men shifted in the shadows, but Valen's men shifted first. Weapons rose from behind pillars. From the choir loft. From the side doors Sable had not even noticed. Soren had not come to a negotiation. He had come to an execution. He just had not understood whose. His mask dropped. For the first time, Sable saw the rage beneath the polish. You think this restores your brother? Soren snapped. Kael was weak. He would have given his name to a girl with nothing. Valen's eyes went black. Sable's hand twitched, but she did not reach for him. He did not need restraint now. He needed truth. Kael loved her, she said. Soren looked at her. Sable lifted her chin. That is why you hated him, not because he was weak, because he had something you could only destroy, never understand. Soren lunged. Not at Valen, at her. Everything happened at once. A candle toppled. Men shouted. Marble echoed beneath sudden violence. Sable stepped back, not freezing this time. Valen was already there. He caught Soren before the man's hand touched her, driving him sideways into the edge of a pew. Soren swung, fast and vicious, but Valen moved like pain no longer existed, wounded, bleeding beneath his bandages, furious enough to become something ancient. Soren reached for a blade. Sable saw the flash. Valen! Valen twisted. The blade grazed his sleeve instead of his side, then his hand closed around Soren's wrist. The crack of bone sounded obscenely loud in the chapel. Soren dropped to one knee. Valen leaned close, voice too low for most of the room, but Sable heard. For Kael. Then he struck him, not wildly, not with rage, spilling in every direction. With finality. Soren Vaskari fell at the foot of the altar, the smile gone from his face forever. No one moved. Riven started begging, not loudly at first, a broken mutter, then louder when Valen turned toward him. Valen, cousin, blood. Valen's face did not change. Riven shook his head, eyes wild. I was protecting the family. You opened my gates to men who entered a nursery. I didn't know they would. You knew. The two words ended him more completely than any weapon could have. Valen looked to Marek. Take him below. Riven screamed then. Not for forgiveness, for power he no longer had. The doors closed behind him. Sable did not ask where they were taking him. Some punishments did not belong in her hands. And for the first time she was glad. Afterward, Valen stood before the remaining Draviks in the chapel, with blood seeping faintly beneath his jacket, and Sable beside him. Not behind. Beside, Mireva watched from the first pew, face pale, diamonds trembling at her throat. Valen's voice filled the chapel. Niven is Kael Dravik's son. No one interrupted. No one dared. He will carry his father's name. He will inherit his father's truth, and he will be protected by this house because this house failed him once already. His gaze moved across the room. Then, finally, to Sable. Sable Arvessa protected Dravik blood when Dravik blood betrayed it. No one questions her place again. Sable's chest tightened. Mireva lowered her eyes. One by one, the others followed. It was not acceptance. Not yet. But it was surrender. For now, that was enough. Days later, Sable went to Leora's grave alone. The cemetery was quiet beneath a gray sky. Wind moved through the grass, bending the stems around the stone that still looked too new, too clean, too impossible. Sable knelt and placed fresh white flowers at the base. For a long moment, she could not speak. Then she touched her sister's name. He loved you, she whispered. The words broke on the way out. Sable closed her eyes. Kael loved you. He never left you. He was coming back. I am so sorry it took me this long to bring you the truth. The wind lifted her hair. She imagined because grief made fools of even practical women that Leora heard. Niven is safe, Sable continued. He has your mouth, his father's eyes. My temper, apparently. A laugh slipped out with a sob tangled in it. And Valen. She paused, looking down at the flowers. Valen is not what I thought. That was all she could say there. Some feelings were too new to place on a grave. When she returned to the estate, the nursery door was open. Warm light spilled into the hall. Sable stopped in the doorway. Valen stood beside the crib in a black shirt, jacket gone, sleeves rolled, Niven asleep against his chest. His bandages were hidden now, but she knew every wound beneath them. The one from her bullet. The one from the blade. The older ones no doctor could stitch. He was murmuring something under his breath. Sable stepped closer. What are you saying to him? Valen glanced at her. He only sleeps when I threaten enemy families quietly. For one stunned second, Sable stared. Then she laughed, soft, real. The sound filled the nursery like light. Valen looked at her as if the sound mattered more than he wanted it to. Carefully, he lowered Niven into the crib. The baby stirred, sighed, and settled. Sable came to stand beside him. Their shoulders almost touched. For a while, neither spoke. They simply watched the baby breathe. The child of two people who had loved each other and lost everything. The child of a murdered father and a broken mother. The child who had survived lies, blood, grief, and men who thought babies could be erased like inconvenient secrets. Sable felt Valen's hand brush hers. Not taking. Asking. She looked down. Then she let her fingers slide into his. His hand closed around hers carefully, like he knew strength could protect or crush depending on how it was held. Sable looked at Niven, then at Valen. Once she had opened her door and seen the enemy. She had raised a gun at the wrong brother because grief needed somewhere to go. But somehow, Through blood and truth and the ruins of every lie, the right one had stayed. And for the first time since Leora died, Sable did not feel like she was standing guard alone. Epilogue. 1 year later, Sable Arvessa stood in the Dravik chapel holding a baby who had learned to glare like a dawn. Niven sat on her hip in a tiny black suit, one fist tangled in her hair, his dark eyes fixed on the priest as if he had personally offended him. Sable leaned close to his ear. "Stop looking at Father Thomas like that," she whispered. "He baptized you, not insulted your bloodline." Niven babbled something furious and slapped one small hand against her collarbone. From beside her, Valen made a quiet sound. Not quite a laugh, close enough to make Sable turn her head. He stood at her side in a black suit, broad shoulders filling out the expensive cut, his Dravik signet gleaming on his hand. To anyone else, he looked exactly as he had the first night she met him, dangerous, untouchable, made of money and violence and old grief. But Sable knew better now. She knew the scar beneath his shirt where her bullet had entered him. She knew the faint line near his ribs where Soren's man had cut him in the nursery. She knew the way his voice changed when Niven cried in his sleep. She knew Valen Dravik, feared Don of one of the oldest crime families in the city, could sit beside a crib for 3 hours without moving, because a baby had wrapped 5 fingers around one of his. And she knew he kept every promise he made. That was the part that had undone her slowly. Not his power, not his darkness, not even the brutal beauty of the man when he stood before enemies and made them regret being born. It was the promises. Valen had not taken Niven. He had not hidden Sable behind walls and called it mercy. He had not turned Leora's son into a symbol and forgotten the soft, living child beneath the Dravik name. Every morning, Niven woke in the nursery Sable had chosen for him, with yellow curtains because Leora had loved sunlight. Every night, Valen checked the locks, the guards, the cameras, and then sat in the rocking chair with a storybook upside down because Niven enjoyed chewing the corners more than listening. He protected like a monster, loved like a man learning the language by touch. And Sable, who had once believed love was the thing that got women buried, had begun to understand it differently. Love had not killed Leora, lies had, power had, men like Soren had. Love was the thing that had survived them. At the front of the chapel, 2 portraits stood on either side of the altar. Kael Dravik on the left, Sable Arvessa on the right. Not hidden, not whispered about, not tucked away like shame. Kael smiled from his frame with that reckless, beautiful charm Sable had once hated because she thought it belonged to a coward. Leora's portrait was softer, painted from Sable's favorite photograph, her dark hair loose, her eyes full of the ridiculous hope that had made her brave enough to love a Dravik boy. Between them on the altar rested a small silver plaque. For Kael and Leora. Love lied about is still love. Blood lost is still blood. Truth comes home. Sable had written the last line herself. Valen had read it once, said nothing, and had the plaque made by morning. Now the chapel was full. Draviks lined the pews in black and gray and deep wine, their faces carefully arranged into respect. Some of them had learned quickly after Soren's fall. Some still watched Sable with the unease of people forced to bow to a woman they once dismissed. She did not mind. Unease was better than insult, and after what had happened to Riven, no one tested the difference. Mareva sat in the front row, spine straight, diamonds modest for once. She had not apologized in words. Women like Mareva rarely did. But 3 months ago, she had sent Niven a hand-stitched blanket with the Dravik crest on one corner and Leora's initials embroidered on the other. Sable had kept it. Not forgiveness, acknowledgement. Sometimes that was where peace began. Father Thomas finished the blessing and stepped aside. Valen took Niven from Sable's arms. The baby went willingly, which still annoyed Sable on difficult days. "Traitor," she whispered. Niven grinned. Valen held him against his chest, one broad hand spread over the baby's back. Then he turned to the chapel. The entire room stood. Not because they loved easily, because Valen had commanded it without saying a word. His voice filled the chapel. 1 year ago, I learned my brother left behind a son. Sable's chest tightened. She had heard him rehearse this twice. Both times he had stopped there. Both times grief had made his throat close, and Sable had taken Niven from his arms without saying a word. Now Valen continued. I also learned my house had failed that son before he ever drew breath. No one moved. Niven pulled at Valen's tie. Valen let him. A few nervous eyes flicked toward the baby, then away again. Kael Dravik died trying to return to the woman he loved. Sable Arvessa died believing a lie meant to break her. Their child lived because one woman refused to let grief make her weak. His gaze found Sable. Her eyes burned. She hated crying in public. Valen knew that, which meant, of course, he kept going. Sable Arvessa stood between Niven and hunger, poverty, fear, and every enemy who thought a mother without a name behind her would be easy to move. A hush fell over the pews. She was not easy. Someone in the back coughed. Sable was almost certain it was Marek hiding a laugh. Valen's mouth barely twitched. She shot me before she trusted me. Niven babbled loudly, delighted by something invisible. That time, someone did laugh. Softly. Carefully. Sable closed her eyes for half a second. This man, this impossible, infuriating, loyal man. Valen looked down at Niven. But she kept my brother's son alive. That makes her more Dravik than most born with the name. Sable's breath caught. The room went completely silent. Valen lifted his gaze again. Today, before this family, before Kael and Leora, and before every enemy still foolish enough to listen, I name Niven Kael Dravik as protected heir of this house. Niven slapped Valen's chest again. Valen continued without reacting. And I name Sable Arvessa as his mother, his guardian, and the woman no one in my bloodline outranks where his heart is concerned. Sable stared at him. She knew he was going to name Niven. She did not know he was going to name her like that. Her throat closed so tightly she could barely breathe. Valen stepped toward her, the chapel blurred around the edges. He lowered his voice enough that the family still heard, but the words belonged to her first. You once asked me if I cared about you or only the child. Sable remembered the nursery, the empty bassinet, the almost kiss that never became one because danger had chosen that moment to come through the gates. She remembered asking, and me? Valen stopped in front of her, Niven between them, warm and alive and chewing the end of his tie. I care, Valen said. No poetry, no performance, just truth, the kind that stood on its own. Sable's heart broke in the gentlest way. She reached up and brushed Niven's cheek, then Valen's tie, rescuing the damp silk from the baby's determined grip. You always say important things like a man signing a death warrant, she whispered. His eyes warmed. Only a little. Only for her. I am better at warrants. I know. Niven squealed and lunged toward her. Valen passed him over. Their hands brushed during the exchange. This time, Sable did not pull away. This time, he did not either. After the ceremony, when the chapel emptied and the Draviks moved to the grand dining hall for a celebration that looked suspiciously like a strategy meeting with cake, Sable slipped away with Niven and Valen. No guards followed them into the garden, not visibly. Sable knew better than to believe they were alone. But the illusion was nice. The garden behind the estate had changed since she first arrived. Back then, it had seemed cold, precise, arranged for people who wanted beauty controlled. Now one corner belonged to Leora. Sable had insisted. Valen had not argued. There were white roses there because Leora loved them, pale yellow tulips because Sable remembered buying them for her once when they were both broke and pretending they were not, and a small stone bench beneath an old tree where Sable sometimes sat with Niven in the afternoons. Beside the bench, a young sapling had been planted for Kael. It was stubbornly alive despite a late frost, which Sable found appropriate. She sat on the bench with Niven in her lap, while Valen stood behind her, one hand resting on the back of the stone. For a while, they said nothing. Niven played with the moon charm on Sable's necklace, Leora's old necklace, the one Sable had started wearing after the trial of grief finally found a place to settle in her body. He looks like her when he smiles, Sable said. Valen looked down at the baby. He looks like Kael when he is about to cause trouble. So always? Mostly. Niven chose that moment to throw his small shoe into the roses. Sable sighed. Your nephew is dramatic. Your son has excellent aim. She turned her head, giving him a look. Valen corrected himself smoothly. Our problem. That did it, she laughed. The garden seemed to loosen around the sound. Valen came around the bench and crouched in front of her, retrieving the shoe from the roses. Instead of putting it back on Niven, he held it for a moment, thumb brushing the tiny sole. Sable watched his face. The grief was still there. It always would be, but it no longer devoured everything else. Do you ever think about what they would have been like? She asked. Valen looked toward the portraits inside the chapel, though the walls hid them now. Kael would have spoiled him. Leora would have let him. She would have scolded Kael for it, then spoiled even worse when no one was watching. Valen nodded once. Yes. Sable smiled through the ache, then Valen looked at her. And you? What about me? What would you have been like if none of this had happened? The question hit deeper than she expected. Sable looked down at Niven, at his small hand patting her necklace, at the life she had never planned and would never surrender. I don't know, she admitted. Less tired, less angry. Valen's gaze did not leave her, not better. Her eyes lifted. He said it like fact, not flattery. That made it worse. Better. Her mouth trembled once before she controlled it. You don't know that. I know you. The words landed softly, dangerously. Sable looked away because the garden had become too bright and her heart had become too exposed. Valen stood and sat beside her on the bench, close enough that his shoulder brushed hers. He did not take her hand. He waited. That was what Valen did now. He waited at thresholds he could have forced open. Sable looked down at his hand resting on his knee. The scar from an old fight crossed one knuckle. The Dravik ring gleamed dark and heavy. The same ring she had seen the night she shot him. The same ring that had made her mistake him for a ghost. Slowly, she placed her hand over his. Valen turned his palm upward and laced their fingers together. No one spoke. Niven babbled between them, patting both their joined hands like he approved the arrangement. Sable laughed under her breath. Bossy little thing. Valen looked at the baby. He is a Dravik. He is also an Arvessa. Then God help us. Sable smiled. For a moment she could almost feel Leora there, not as pain, as presence, a soft memory in the sunlight, a sister laughing because Sable Arvessa, who had once sworn she would never trust a Dravik, now sat in a garden holding hands with the most dangerous one alive while raising the child both families had nearly lost. Sable looked at the roses. I kept my promise, she whispered. Valen's hand tightened around hers. Yes, he said, you did. She leaned her head against his shoulder. It was not surrender. It was rest. There was a difference, and Valen understood it well enough not to move. Niven grew quiet in her lap, heavy with sleep, his cheek pressed against her chest. The estate stood behind them, full of shadows and history, and people still learning what loyalty meant. The garden waited ahead, full of living things. Sable closed her eyes. 1 year ago, grief had put a gun in her hand and sent a bullet into the wrong brother. But truth had done something stranger. It had turned an enemy into a shield, a dawn into a home, a dead woman's baby into the heartbeat of a family that had almost forgotten how to love without owning. And as Valen's lips brushed the top of her head, soft enough that only she felt it, Sable finally understood the mercy hidden beneath all that blood. Leora and Kael had not survived their love, but their son had. And because he had, so did they. Thank you for listening to She Shot the Dawn, then found out he came for his dead brother's baby. If this story pulled you in, let me know in the comments which moment hit you hardest. Sable pulling the trigger, Valen realizing Niven was his brother's son, Leora's final truth, or the chapel showdown where everything finally came to light. This was a story about grief, revenge, motherhood, blood, and the kind of love that survives even when lies try to bury it. Sable thought hatred was the only thing keeping her strong, but in the end, truth gave her something even stronger. A family she never expected, a child she refused to surrender, and a Dawn who learned that protection does not mean possession. If you love dark Mafia romance audiobooks filled with emotional twists, dangerous men, secret babies, betrayal, and powerful endings, make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next story. Share this story with someone you know who might like it. And as always, this story was written and brought to life by Bayless. Thank you for listening, thank you for supporting the channel, and I'll see you in the next dangerous love story. Until then, stay ruined.